Many people don't believe in the existence of ghosts, but for every skeptic, there are hundreds of people who insist that they've seen at least one spirit in their lives. While no solid proof of the existence of ghosts has ever been found, it's a belief that's shared by cultures all around the world and continues to frighten even non-believers who have changed their minds after experiencing events that they can't explain. Usually, when someone becomes aware that their house may be haunted, they take every possible step to either get rid of the spirit that's inside the house or to move to a new home where they can find some peace. But in many cases, this isn't always possible, since moving to a new house can be very expensive, especially if the new owners of the house had just recently bought it. In these cases, the affected people either find temporary accommodation or just learn to live with the hauntings in their house, as was the case with a family that lived in Wales in a house that was built in 1873. In the 1990s, the Gower family moved into the farmhouse at Pennyford Farm, and at first it seemed like an idyllic location to raise their children. But they would soon learn that they were actually sharing the house with a spirit, and they believe they know who it belongs to. The first sign of strange activity came when strange words started appearing on the walls inside the house. And at first, the family thought it was just gibberish, until they realized that the words were written in Welsh. Since none of the family members spoke Welsh, they decided to buy a Welsh to English dictionary so that they could figure out what the messages meant and who had written them on the walls, and they didn't have to wait long. Soon after, the word Tengnafed appeared above the house's fireplace, and after checking the dictionary, the family learned that it meant religious peace. But they still had no idea who was responsible for writing the word there. But they would soon find the answers that they were looking for as the strange activity in the house began to occur more regularly. While asleep in her bed one night, the family's daughter, Adrian, woke to find that there was someone in her room. And as her eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, she realized that it was the figure of a monk that was pacing around the foot of her bed. Adrian's brother, John Paul, soon reported seeing the same monk in his room on multiple occasions, but strangely he wasn't scared of the apparition and said that he and the spirit had become friends and that he thought of the monk as a family pet rather than a horrifying apparition. Every member of the Gower family had now seen the strange apparition, and soon the monk became like a member of the family, and they even gave it the moniker Brother Adolphus or Brother Dolly. In one incident, the children's mother, Rosemary, reported that she had seen the monk walking around in the garden at night, and John Paul added that he had seen the same thing, but said that the apparition was petting their dog, Aslan, a German shepherd that was buried in the garden after it passed away some time earlier. Brother Dolly was now so much part of the family that he could be seen in photos taken by people who were visiting the family at the farmhouse, and all the while the writing on the wall continued. Sometimes the writing was the same as before, with Welsh words seemingly appearing out of nowhere. But they also started noticing stains that began appearing on the walls in the shape of a monk. The next set of words to appear were healing and faith, and they were now more convinced than ever that it was indeed the ghostly monk that was responsible. These words weren't merely written on the walls as before, but rather carved right into the stone. Rosemary and the rest of the family inspected these writings closely, looking for any evidence of chipping around the letters or dust on the floor, but they were unable to find any. The family also says that just 6 weeks after their beloved dog passed away, they noticed the word dog had inexplicably appeared on a wall in the kitchen. Still, there was the chance that this was all some sort of elaborate prank that was being played by one of the family members, or perhaps more sinisterly, by someone outside the family that was trying to scare them. But this theory was soon put to rest when 2 Welsh words appeared on the walls in full view of the family. Rosemary stated that one minute the walls were completely normal, but just moments later, the words had been scrawled on the wall. This time, the words were prayer and rosary. Since all these words had religious meanings, the family had now all but confirmed that the monk meant them no harm, and they continued to live in the house while the strange activity still carried on. On another occasion, the word monk appeared on a wall, and one of the family members decided to take a photo of it. Rosemary attempted to remove the strange stains from the wall using bleach, but she found that the writing seemed to appear and disappear of its own accord, and so the family decided to just let them be. Visitors to the family's home also reported a few strange events. When a man who had been at the house for a visit returned to his house, he opened his laptop to find that the word religious peace was scrawled inside the lid. Other visitors found that while they were inside the house, their watches would suddenly lose time, as if they were running slower than they should be. On one occasion, a reporter had visited the house since news of the strange haunting had reached the media, and when she was preparing to leave, she found that her return train ticket had gone missing. The family looked all over the house, thinking that she may have dropped it, and they eventually found it behind a clock on the mantle. Next, the monk wrote the words millennium and 2000 on the walls, and shortly after that, the word monk was found mown into the lawn. When a psychic from North Wales named Elwyn Roberts visited the family's home along with a film crew, he chose to use automatic writing during his investigation. When he looked down at the page afterward, he found that he had written the word joy with the monk's help. But Roberts had more information to share about the family's ghostly friend. He stated that he had visions in which he saw the monk kneeling by the side of a river. He had his hands up as if he was shielding himself against something, and standing in front of him was a man on horseback who was wielding a sword. He then saw the flash of the man's blade and felt the monk did his best to evade the blows but ultimately failed and perished. He added that Brother Doley felt he'd passed away before his time and decided to live with the Gower family since they seemed like good and sympathetic people. Roberts also told the family that the monk had perished in 1613, after which they showed him a carving that had been made in the house's lintel that read 1610. Though many people still believe that this haunting was an elaborate hoax, there are many other witnesses that saw the words appear on the walls right before their eyes, and the family, who have since moved to another house, still believe that they once lived with the ghost of a 17th century monk. Anyone who has traveled to Scotland will know that it's known for its beautiful green scenery, rolling hills and lochs. Added to that are the many castles that can be seen around the country, some of which are centuries old. One such building, known as the Carbisdale Castle, was built between the years 1906 and 1917, and is said to be one of the most beautiful and the last grand castle ever built in Scotland. It has 6 floors, 40 rooms, a bell tower, and 365 windows, one for each day of the year. But while most castles were built either for a specific king or queen or as a stronghold against enemy forces, Carbisdale Castle has a slightly more sinister history, one that's born out of spite. Prior to 1883, Mary Caroline Blair was married to Captain Arthur Blair, who at the time was working for George Sutherland Levison Gower, the 3rd Duke of Sutherland. Unfortunately, Arthur would pass away in 1883, when he was the unfortunate victim of an accident involving a firearm, and what followed was a bitter dispute between Mary and Arthur's children from his previous marriage. Problems began when Mary became the Duke's mistress, as her new husband's children didn't think it was appropriate for them to be together. But things only got worse when it came to light that Mary and the Duke were set to be married, and Mary would become the Duchess of Sutherland. Only further exacerbating matters, Mary decided to oppose the children's inheritance that they were meant to receive after the Duke passed away in 1892, 9 years after her first husband had passed away. Matters between Mary and the Duke's children were already soured, but they became even worse when the Duke's children found out that he'd left almost everything he owned to Mary, and the Duke's son, who was set to become the 4th Duke, decided to contest it in court. While the matter was being thrashed out in court, a few sordid details emerged that didn't paint Mary in the best light. It was discovered that she'd purposely destroyed vital documents relating to the will, and their destruction ensured that she would receive everything, while the Duke's children would be left with very little. Mary was found guilty of committing fraud, and for this, she was sent to Holloway Prison in London, where she spent 6 weeks behind bars. Once she'd finished her short stint in prison, Mary met with the Duke's children, and they decided it would be best to come to some sort of agreement. They decided on a settlement in which a castle would be built for Mary to live in, with the condition that it must be built outside of the Duke's Sutherland estate. Added to this was a large sum of money that would be paid to her. The children must have thought that this was the best way to ensure that Mary would be out of their lives forever, but this was not the case, as Mary had other ideas in mind. She decided that the castle should be built in Carbisdale, and most historians believe that she did this out of spite towards the Duke's children, since it could be seen from the estate. She then added 3 clocks to the castle's tower, with one side left blank. the blank side, faces Sutherland where the Duke's children resided, and it's believed that it was also done in spite, since Mary didn't want to give them the time of day. And so it became known as the Castle of Spite, where Mary lived until 1933, when it was sold to a Scottish businessman by the name of Colonel Theodore Salveson. Thereafter, the building served as a haven for multiple kings of Norway. During World War II, the castle was used to conduct many important meetings, during which military strategies were discussed. The colonel would pass away in 1942, after which the castle became the property of his son, who in turn donated the entire building and all of its contents to the Scottish Youth Hostels Association. It remained the property of the association until 2016, when it became too expensive to maintain, and in 2021 it went on the market again, with a price tag of £1.5 million. But potential buyers were warned that they may have to share the building with the spirits that dwell within its walls and on the grounds. One of the rooms, known as Room 218, or the Spook Room, served as a nursery in the past, and it's here that many people have reported experiencing strange events that they can't explain. Guests have reported seeing strange shadows moving around the room, and inexplicable figures have been seen walking around the beds while guests are trying to sleep. Some people have experienced rainfall inside the room, while others report that they could hear the sound of children talking and crying. On one occasion, a guest was horrified to find that all the beds in the room had been turned the wrong way around, but the strange activity doesn't end there. People have also heard the sound of disembodied bagpipe music, as well as organ music coming from the castle's ballroom, despite it being empty at the time. But the most well-known spirit in the castle is known as the White Lady. She was spotted for the first time by a man named George Murray, who worked in the castle's gardens. He stated that as he looked up from what he was doing, he saw a woman in a white dress standing next to a bush, but as soon as he saw her, she disappeared into thin air. Murray would see the woman on a few more occasions, and when other visitors reported seeing the same thing, speculation started that it may be the spirit of Mary that still lingers in the castle's gardens. Lastly, the spirit of a man dressed in military clothing has also been seen. It's thought that he fought in the Battle of Carbisdale, and that he lost his life while doing so. Those who have seen him says he seems angry or distressed while he walks down one of the castle's corridors before disappearing the same way that Mary's spirit does. It isn't often that a tale of haunting or possession is corroborated by a police officer, but that's exactly what happened in November of 2011, when Captain Charles Austin of the Gary Police Department in Indiana was called to the house where a woman claimed that she was possessed by a demon. At first, he took the woman's claims with a pinch of salt, as he thought she may be putting on an act in hopes that she could make some money somehow. But after visiting the house several times and witnessing a spate of inexplicable events, he says that he believes every word. The case would eventually involve a priest, the Department of Child Services, as well as psychologists, and the case file would eventually fill a staggering 800 pages as the strange events were recorded. It all began in November of 2011, when Latoya Emmons and her family moved into a house that was situated on Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana. The following month, the family began to notice swarms of large black flies on the outside of their screen door, and since it was the middle of winter, they found it rather unusual. Latoya's mother, Rosa Campbell, says that she immediately knew something was wrong since it isn't normal for that many flies to be around during such cold conditions. And try as they may, they couldn't get rid of the flies, despite constantly killing as many as they could. When the strange activity inside the house started, the first sign of trouble came when both Latoya and Rosa began hearing the sound of footsteps on the basement stairs. This would often be followed by the sound of the door between the kitchen and basement opening, but upon investigating, they would always find that there was no one there, and they were left without an explanation. They eventually decided to lock the door, but still they could hear it creaking in the middle of the night, despite it being impossible to open. But this was only the beginning of the family's troubles, as things began to escalate when Latoya woke up one night to find that a male shadow figure was walking around the living room. Thinking that there was a stranger in the house, she immediately ran into the room, but found that the figure had disappeared, leaving behind nothing but a set of wet boot prints. Things only got worse from here while the family was mourning the passing of someone close to them. On the 10th of March the following year, Latoya and her children were still awake at 2 a.m. while they were mourning with some of Latoya's friends. Suddenly, Latoya, who was in Rosa's room with her daughter, started calling frantically for her mother, and when Rosa entered the room, she was horrified to see her granddaughter floating above the bed in midair. Everyone present in the house ran into the room and began praying, and eventually she floated back onto the bed, and when she woke up, she stated that she couldn't remember what had happened to her. Not surprisingly, the visitors who were there that night never returned, as they were too frightened of what they might see or experience. Latoya was now convinced that something supernatural was present in the house, and fearing for the safety of her children and her mother, she decided to contact churches in the area, but only one offered any assistance. Members of one church agreed to visit the house, and after doing so, they reported that the building was indeed haunted. Latoya was told to use bleach and ammonia to cleanse the house, after which she was to draw crosses on each window and door inside the house using oil. But this did little to stop the strange activity, and when Latoya contacted two clairvoyants, they told her that her house was possessed by as many as 200 demons, and that they would have to move out. But it was a move that Latoya could not afford, and so she was given more advice. She built an altar in the house's basement and cleansed the house by burning sage and sulfur, which seemed to work as there was no further activity for the next 3 days. But then the activity escalated as Latoya and her children all became possessed. Rosa reported that Latoya and the children would suddenly have evil grins on their faces, and their voices would become impossibly deep, while Latoya described the possessions leaving her feeling warm and slightly dizzy. They would also report feeling as if they were being strangled by some unseen hand that caused them to become completely immobile. They would also hear voices telling them that they're about to pass away or that they would never see the other members of their family again. Realizing that nothing had changed despite their best efforts, Latoya decided to seek help from the family's doctor, who says he immediately became scared when he walked into the house. Even worse, when he walked in Latoya's son's room, he started yelling at the doctor in a deep, unnerving voice. Not surprisingly, the Department of Child Safety became involved, and in their report they mentioned that medical staff saw the boy lifting up against a wall despite there being no one near him. At that moment, both her sons lost consciousness, and they decided to call the police. As many as 8 officers responded to the scene, and the 2 boys were taken to a hospital, where one woke up calmly, but the other started thrashing around so wildly that 5 men had to restrain him. Fearing that Latoya may have a mental problem, she was examined by a psychiatrist who determined she was completely healthy, but shortly after, a DCS family case manager would witness something that she couldn't explain. While in an interview room with the whole family, one of the boys began to growl menacingly, after which he climbed up one of the walls backward. He reached all the way up to the ceiling before flipping over his mother and making a perfect landing on his feet. The caseworker stated that it would have been impossible for anyone to do that, and she was left terrified and baffled as she bolted out of the room. The family decided to stay with a family member for the time being, and in the meantime, 2 police officers went to the house to investigate further. One of the officers made a recording in which voices can be heard, despite the house being empty, and when they took a few photos, they noticed the image of a face on the basement stairs. After leaving the house, one of the officers reported that his vehicle's driver's seat started moving back and forth on its own, and the other officer couldn't get his garage door to open, and neither could he find an explanation. The family would experience many more inexplicable events, but after a priest performed a series of exorcisms on Latoya, the family returned to normal, and the new tenants of the house have reported no unusual activity since they moved in. There's a type of spirit known as a hungry ghost in Japanese and Chinese culture. They're known as gaki in Japan, and they're thought to have been driven by malicious emotions such as greed and hatred. Other hungry ghosts are the result of an improper burial, a violent passing, or taking their own life. It's believed that during the 7th month of each year, the gates of hell are opened and these hungry ghosts are let loose to deal with whatever unfinished business they have. During this time, households will leave out food for the spirits so that they won't enter their houses, but if they do come too close, they can be driven away with loud noises and smoke until they return again the following year. One such vengeful spirit is thought to belong to a Chinese nobleman named Tu Po, since he passed away after being betrayed by his own king. Tu Po served as the Duke of Tengdu in Guangdong, China, while serving as a minister to King Xuan of Zhou from 827 to 781. The king proved to be unpopular, however, since he meddled in affairs that he had no hand in, and many of the lords of the era refused to obey his commands, something that could easily end in their executions. 9 years into his reign, the king would call these lords to a meeting in which he explained that he got word of a woman in the town of Jiangshan that would soon pose a significant risk, though the reason isn't specified. Not knowing who the woman was, the king decided that a mass execution of women was in order, and Tu Po, who was very outspoken as a duke, found this completely unacceptable. But he knew that speaking out against the king was seen as treason, and that he could lose his life as a result. Nevertheless, he could not let the executions be carried out, and he made it known publicly that he would not be following the king's wishes. When the king got word of this treason, he ordered Tu Po's execution, but the duke had a few choice words before he met his end. They're recorded as follows, saying, quote, "If my majesty kills me without reason, the dead may not know. Well, that's it. However, on the other hand, I will avenge myself on him within 3 years." The king had been warned, but not one to go back on his word, he followed through with the execution despite most people believing that Tu Po was innocent. Not thinking much of the duke's threats, the king continued his reign for the next 3 years, until he decided to go on a hunt one day, with his new dukes and thousands of servants who had traveled in hundreds of chariots. For the next few hours, the hunt went well, and nothing untoward happened. That is, until around noon, when Tu Po finally exacted his revenge as he promised. Out of nowhere, he appeared on a cart that was being pulled by a white horse. It's also said that he was wearing a red coat, and in his hands he carried a red bow and arrow. Once the king spotted the spirit, he fled, but Tu Po gave chase after him and eventually caught up. He aimed his arrow at the king's chest and fired, striking him in the heart, breaking his spine and ending his life. Tu Po had finally kept his promise of revenge, but other versions of this tale have also been told for centuries. Since none of the king's dukes or servants saw him being felled by Tu Po's spirits, some accounts hold that his life wasn't actually ended with an arrow, but that he passed away out of fear after having a dream that Tu Po ended his life with a red arrow. But most people, including some prominent Chinese philosophers, believe that the first account is in fact true, and that the king really did succumb to an arrow fired by the ghostly apparition of the scorned duke. These days, the Lemp Mansion, which is located in St. Louis, Missouri, has been outfitted to serve as a bed and breakfast, dinner theater, and restaurant. But back in the day, it saw its fair share of tragedy and scandal, while it was home to generations of the Lemp family. The first of the Lemps to arrive in America was Johann Adam Lemp, who originally hailed from Germany, where he learned the fine art of beer brewing from his father. After settling in St. Louis, he decided to open a grocery store, from where he sold common household items and beer that he had brewed himself. Soon, Lemp's beer became so popular that he decided to abandon his dreams of being a grocer, in favor of opening a small brewery. He opened a small bar next to the brewery, supplying locals with St. Louis's first ever lager. But he soon found out that he didn't have enough space to brew the amounts of beer that was in demand, and so he expanded his storage operations into a limestone cave just outside of town. Here, the beer was kept cool with ice from the Mississippi River, and by 1858, his lager was so popular that it won first place at the St. Louis Fair. When Lemp passed away in 1862, he left his brewery to his son, William, who expanded the business into a 5-city-block-wide brewery, and soon the Lemp Brewery was the largest and richest in St. Louis. In 1876, William bought a house a short distance from the brewery, and soon he transformed it into the Lemp Mansion, an impressive 33-room building complete with tunnels that ran all the way to the brewery. The family had grown incredibly wealthy, and even helped other breweries get started. But then tragedy struck when William's son, Frederick, passed away in 1901 due to heart failure. 3 years later, William's best friend also passed away, and badly affected by the tragedies, he became ever more withdrawn and started losing interest in the everyday running of the brewery. The following year, he declined in both physical and mental health, to the point where he decided to take his own life. William's son, also named William, inherited the family business, and he and his wife, Lillian, lived in the lap of luxury. But William soon fell out of love and tried to spend as little time as possible in Lillian's company. He allotted her $1,000 a day and told her that if she didn't spend it all every day, she would never receive any money from him again, But then his choice of a party lifestyle caught up with him when one of his mistresses fell pregnant and gave birth to a son. Though it's not been verified, it's believed that the family feared a scandal, and the boy was kept in the house's attic, never to be seen outside. Many people who have seen apparitions at the mansion in modern times believe that one of them is the spirit of a boy that still lives in the building. The couple eventually decided to get a divorce, and the court proceedings were the talk of the town in St. Louis, with newspapers publishing daily updates. From here, larger brewing companies ensured the decline of Lemp's business, but he still decided to remodel the mansion, converting one of the rooms into offices. But just a few years later, the brewery was in serious trouble when Prohibition was announced in 1919 and it was closed down. The following year, William's sister ended her own life after her marriage had started falling apart, and 2 years later, William followed suit after he'd fallen into a deep depression over his failed brewery. In 1943, William's son passed away from a heart condition, and his brother Charles took up residence in the mansion. But he also soon started behaving strangely, showing an irrational fear of germs, and he was never seen without gloves on. This seemingly took its toll on Charles, and he ended up taking his own life. Now only one member of the Lemp family, Edwin, was still alive, but he would eventually pass away from natural causes in 1970. Strangely, Edwin's will stated that every single painting, artifact, and document in the Lemp mansion was to be burned, and his wishes were to be carried out without delay. The last member of the Lemp family had passed on, and the mansion was transformed into a boarding house. However, maintenance on the mansion was all but non-existent, and it soon fell into disrepair. Due to its disheveled state, people started to believe that it was haunted, and not many were willing to stay the night. But it was soon rescued by a man named Dick Pointer, who transformed it into an inn and restaurant. But while construction was ongoing, many of the workers abandoned their post after experiencing strange events, including their tools going missing, hearing disembodied footsteps, and inexplicable shadows. But construction continued, and soon the inn opened for business, but the hauntings only got worse from there. Guests and staff members would report seeing apparitions in the building, but as soon as they saw them, they would fade away. Cutlery and glassware were seen levitating above the bar, and a piano that was placed in the bar area often started playing on its own when no one was seated anywhere near it. On other occasions, guests would hear voices that seemed to originate out of thin air, and the lights would turn on and off without explanation. But it's in the attic, on the stairs, and in the basement where most of the frightening activity has been observed. Since it's rumored that Lemp kept his illegitimate son locked in the attic for years on end, many people attribute the activity in that area to him, and many people have reported seeing his face in the attic window as they pass by the building. When tests were carried out by placing toys in the middle of the room, it was found a short while later that they had been moved. Other members of the Lemp family have also been spotted on the stairs and in the basement, but activity has been reported all through the mansion. When a group of visitors were walking through the house on one occasion, they came across a member of staff who seemed annoyed at the group's slow progress. They described him as an older man with a pale face who was wearing a white shirt and black trousers, and in his hand he held a key. But the group would later learn that no such staff member existed, and instead they'd come across one of the spirits that walked around the mansion. Another visitor, a woman who held her wedding at the mansion, reported that she'd laid her wedding dress and accessories out neatly on the bed in preparation for her big day. But after turning her back for just a few moments, she found that the dress and other items had been moved around. On another occasion, when two friends stayed over at the house, they were left completely alone in the building after the staff had ended their shifts. While preparing for bed, they started hearing a cat meowing in one of the upstairs bedrooms, and they decided to investigate. Upon entering the room, they could still hear the cat meowing, but despite searching the entire room, it was nowhere to be seen. They also found that many of the photos that they'd taken contained strange orbs that they believed to be spirits. Other guests complained that they felt as though they're being constantly watched, and they're left with an eerie, uneasy feeling the entire time that they're there. One woman reported hearing the voice of a small boy. Initially, she thought it was her brother, and she told him to be quiet, but he replied that he hadn't said anything, and that's when they both heard the same voice saying, "Come play with me." Another incident happened while the woman was visiting the mansion with her aunt. They had plans to go out that night, and so the woman decided to take a nap before heading out. But she was awoken by the sound of a baby crying and a woman talking loudly just outside her room. and she became annoyed, thinking that the woman was being unnecessarily rude. But when they spoke to staff members later on, they learned that at the time, they were completely alone in the building, and that there certainly wasn't a baby in the house. It would seem that the Lemp family is reluctant to let go of their mansion and still keep an eye on anyone who decides to stop over for a visit. Not only could we be living in one of many universes, but some scientists theorize that our universe is closer to those around us than we might think. And one cosmologist believes that he's found proof that this is indeed correct. To understand this concept, we need to go back to the very beginning of time, when everything in existence came to be. Scientists say that for around 300,000 years after our universe started expanding, it was chaotic, unstructured, and filled with unpredictable particles. But then the universe began to cool in an event that we've called recombination. And eventually atoms began to form, finally making it possible for light to travel unencumbered. The result of this cooling was what we call the cosmic microwave background, the radiation that's been left behind by the so-called Big Bang. Thanks to the cosmic microwave background, scientists are able to do all kinds of research that includes data about our universe from as far back as the beginning of time. We've since discovered galaxies that we never knew existed, many planets that resemble our own, and other phenomena such as black holes that still mystify us today. During one study of the cosmic microwave background in 2010, astrophysicist Stephen Feeney and his team made a remarkable discovery that suggests that our universe has been in close contact with others, and they seem to have left their mark. They got so close, in fact, that they collided with one another, and our universe has the bruises to show for it. Researchers have since found 3 more of these bruises, suggesting that our universe has collided with another on at least 4 occasions in the distant past. A few years after this study was conducted, a researcher also did an analysis of the cosmic microwave background while working with the European Space Agency's Planck Space Telescope, and is certain that at some point our universe smashed up against another that's much larger than the one we live in. This theory was further bolstered when scientists discovered a 1.8 billion light-year wide region in our universe that seemingly once held an unknown number of galaxies, though it's thought that at one time it held as many as 10,000. For many years, scientists struggled to find an explanation for the existence of this blank spot, but now they believe that they may have found an answer that would explain why this region of space has 20% less matter than is expected. In a paper that was published by researchers from Durham University, it's theorized that the blank spot is the result of a collision between our universe and one that lies parallel to ours. As the collision occurred, matter that includes galaxies was displaced, leaving behind the empty region in question. But as is the case with most unproven theories, there are many skeptics who believe that the theory of the existence of parallel universes is nothing more than fanciful thinking, since there's no solid evidence to back it up. But researchers believe that they've now found a way to identify signatures left behind after these collisions between parallel universes, one of which is to look for voids where there should be matter and galaxies. They've also started to look for hot spots or cold spots in the cosmic microwave background, and since these collisions can only occur in one particular direction, they have a fairly good idea of where to begin their search, one of which would be the blank spot that was discovered. Another good starting point would be to look for gravitational waves that are formed when massive objects, such as an alternate universe, pass through our space. If these waves are ever detected, it would make a good case for inflation, which is the rapid expansion of our universe in the very moment that the Big Bang occurred. Once this theory is proven, it will exponentially increase the chances that there are multiple universes out there, and that they've collided with ours at some point in history, whether it happened billions of years ago or more recently. The hope is that one day we'll be able to observe these distant universes from afar, and if this ever happens, we'll be able to answer many other questions about our universe, such as whether ours is unique in its ability to sustain life, even if it is just in one tiny corner of space. Most people who believe that there are other universes that exist parallel to ours think they lie in the outer reaches of space that would be impossible for us to reach with the technology that we possess today. But there are some people who believe that these universes can be accessed by other means, including through spiritual means, where a person's consciousness leaves their body and travels through time and space at will. One example of this was a man named Burt Goldman, who was given the moniker the American Monk. Goldman believed that he had perfected the art of meditation, since he practiced it for the last 50 years, and he's made some startling claims. He says that he believes there are an infinite number of universes, each of which is only slightly different than the last, and he claims to be able to travel between them at will through the art of meditation. He added that he first managed to do this, a process that he calls quantum jumping, when he was just 3 years old, and he then realized that parallel universes exist all around us, but we're unable to see them since we aren't fine-tuned to them. He describes the process as a controlled daydream or similar to tuning a radio. Once a person is able to tune into different frequencies around them, they're able to see and access the universes that they were unable to see before. But there are also those who believe that alternate realities can be accessed through portals that exist on our planet, and that it's merely a matter of locating them before we'll be able to travel between these universes. Many people claim that some of the thousands of people who go missing every year, never to be seen again, have either stumbled into one of these portals or chose to go through them, and that they now live in an entirely different reality. This theory gained a lot of followers when ufologist Jaime Maussan revealed that 2 unidentified objects were seen hovering near the Popocatépetl volcano in Mexico, and astonishingly, they were seen entering the volcano while it was erupting. He says that he's certain these crafts are of extraterrestrial origin, since no man-made craft would be able to enter a volcanic eruption without being destroyed, since temperatures inside the volcano can reach as high as 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. But as if this isn't strange enough, Maussan claims that the craft are using the volcano to travel between different dimensions, since the crater serves as an interdimensional portal between worlds. He believes that the strong magnetic field inside the volcano causes a wormhole to open, which can then be accessed by extraterrestrial beings that have perfected the art of interdimensional travel. His theory stems from a study done in Norway, in which it was theorized that magnetic storms under a volcano may result in X-points, where electric diffusion makes it possible for interdimensional portals to be opened and used. The concept of wormholes isn't new to us, since Albert Einstein first hypothesized in the 1930s that they might exist in the form of black holes, and that interdimensional travel might be possible between one wormhole and another. In this case though, Jack Scudder, a NASA physicist, points to areas where the Sun and Earth's magnetic fields intersect each other. He believes that this causes a connection between our planet and the Sun, and that it would be possible to travel the vast distance to the Sun using one of these passages. But Goldman isn't the only one who believes that this volcano offers passage to another world. Luis Guerra, a man from Mexico City, was watching the volcano's activity one morning after it let out a massive blast, and he decided to take a few photos, but what he discovered upon reviewing them left him in disbelief. One of his photos shows the volcano with smoke billowing out the top, but there's something in the sky that seemingly doesn't belong there. Just above the top of the crater, a strange disc-shaped object can be seen hovering, and Guerra is convinced that this is an extraterrestrial craft that's either investigating the volcano or waiting to fly inside. Guerra believes that these crafts are drawn to the volcano thanks to the strong magnetic fields that it generates, and his girlfriend, Carla Garcia, says that she used to be skeptical about UFOs, but she's since grown to believe that they do indeed exist. In another video that was shared across multiple social media platforms, the Popocatépetl was captured as it erupted violently, sending lava flying into the sky above. But it's what happens seconds later that has everyone speculating. As the lava flows down the side of the mountain and smoke rises into the air, a strange white light can be seen streaking across the sky above the volcano, and many people believe that this is one of the extraterrestrial craft that uses that crater to travel between universes. This isn't the first instance where UFOs have been seen flying above an erupting volcano, however. In 2021, another volcano situated in Iceland erupted for the first time in almost 900 years. And as it did so, a stationary camera captured 2 strange blue lights hovering above it. This is just one of many documented cases of strange craft near volcanoes, leading many people to believe that these craft use the energy from the volcanoes to power their ships, enabling them to travel vast distances through space. Others think that these craft enter the volcanoes to access a network of underground bases that are being used by extraterrestrial beings, and that they've been doing so for a very long time. Some also claim that governments around the world are aware of these bases, and some even speculate that these beings and our governments are working together towards some common goal. But many scientists believe that there's a logical explanation for these sightings, and that the lights seen hovering over these volcanoes are a natural phenomenon that's caused by intense heat and magnetic fields produced by these eruptions. But if Goldman's theory is correct, it could mean that we may have access to these portals in the future, enabling us to travel to other worlds at a whim and in the blink of an eye, where it would have taken us years or even decades to travel those distances, even if we had the spaceflight technology to do so. We live in some really interesting times as far as unidentified flying objects go, since the US government has all but admitted to the existence of extraterrestrial beings, and employees working at secret military bases are speaking out about the strange things going on that they've witnessed while performing their duties. But while most casual UFO enthusiasts believe that these beings come from other planets in our universe, there's a more complex theory, known as the Interdimensional UFO hypothesis, that claims that these beings originate in an alternate universe that exists parallel to our own. In 1947, a man named Mead Rain made the claim that UFOs originate from an etheric fourth plane that exists above the planes containing gases, solids, and liquids, and that these UFOs share the same etheric properties. He's credited as being the first person to suggest the theory of the interdimensional UFO hypothesis. He added that these craft have the ability to shift from their etheric state to a solid state, and to us they would appear to materialize and disappear, since we don't have a solid understanding of this etheric plane. But Rain also added that the beings inside these crafts are in fact people. While many believed these beings to be the reincarnations of the deceased, Rain claims that they're humans who live in a parallel universe, and he claims he has proof, since he has the ability to communicate with them telepathically. In 1946, Rain consulted with a psychic medium that had been communicating with these beings for some time. The medium claimed that the beings traveled in a ship called the Kalita, and that they originate from an undisclosed planet in one of these alternate universes. But it wasn't until the 1970s that Rain's theory began to see some traction among ufologists, thanks in part to a book entitled UFO Operation Trojan Horse, which was published in 1970 by paranormal author John Keel. Keel had been studying the UFO phenomenon for many years, but decided to investigate the interdimensional hypothesis instead when he realized that there was an overlap between UFO sightings and some psychic phenomena. He stated that sightings of ghosts, inexplicable lights in the sky, cryptid sightings, demons, vampires, and fairies, to name but a few, were actually sightings of interdimensional beings, but that the people who experienced these events merely saw what they wanted to see. He also believed that the beings that operate extraterrestrial craft are inhuman beings that he called super-earthlings, and that they could change their shape at any time to deceive those who spotted them. Another proponent for this theory was a man named J. Allen Hynek, who had a hand in 3 US government projects concerning UFOs, namely Project Sign, Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book. In 1975, a book entitled The Edge of Reality was published, in which Hynek and Jacques Vallée discussed the existence of universes that are interlocked with each other, rather than existing in separate areas of space. Vallée would publish a paper in 1990 entitled 5 Arguments for the Extraterrestrial Origin of Unidentified Flying Objects, in which he stated that close encounters where humans come into contact with extraterrestrial beings occur far too often for these actions to be considered investigative. He added that since these extraterrestrial craft are able to travel vast distances in the blink of an eye, and the fact that they've been sighted throughout human history suggests that these beings are able to manipulate time and space, suggesting that they aren't from other planets, but rather from alternate universes. David Grush, who formerly was a member of a UAP task force, has also stated that the interdimensional UFO hypothesis would explain where the UFOs that we see in the sky come from. He believes that based on the analysis that was done during his time on the task force, it's likely that a 4th or 5th dimension exists that we're not aware of, and that these beings have the ability to travel between these dimensions and ours. Paranormal investigator Brad Steiger has also suggested that alien beings and their craft aren't actually extraterrestrial, since they might be living on Earth alongside us, only in a different dimension that we can't see. But John Ankerberg and John Weldon, both well-known ufologists, believe that the UFO phenomenon may be spiritual in nature, since these beings and their craft don't behave in a way that extraterrestrial visitors would be expected to. They believe that these beings have evolved to a higher spiritual level than humans have, and that this may have given them the ability to travel between dimensions at will, much like Mead Rain claims to be able to do. For a long time, UFO enthusiasts believe that extraterrestrials are able to travel from faraway planets to ours via superior technology. But thanks to the interdimensional UFO hypothesis, other theories have been put forward. Some people think that these craft aren't actually spacecraft, but machines that allow their pilots to travel from one dimension to another at will. Hilary Evans suggests that this would be a good explanation why these craft are seemingly able to blink in and out of existence, since they're simply jumping from one dimension to another in a matter of milliseconds. But Evans also thinks that we may be seeing humans and craft that exist in our own dimension's future. She theorizes that in the future we'll have advanced exponentially as far as technology is concerned, and that this is why we don't fully understand where these beings originate from. While these concepts may seem far-fetched to some people, ufologists point to a declassified document from the FBI that confirms the existence of interdimensional beings who visit Earth on a regular basis. The report states that some of the UFOs that have been observed by us contain pilots from these dimensions, while others are operated remotely from the other dimension. It also states that these beings mean us no harm, and that they may be planning on living on Earth alongside us. It goes on to state that these beings look similar to humans, but they're much larger than us, and that they aren't from a physical planet, but from an etheric planet that exists alongside our own. But since it's situated in another dimension, we aren't able to observe it. Furthermore, these beings are able to match the frequency at which our universe exists, and when they do so, they seem to materialize in our reality and disappear when they decide to return to their own. The craft that they use possess an energy beam that's powerful enough to destroy an enemy craft, and we may be able to communicate with them not through radio signals, but through a radar signaling system, though this has not been developed yet. Another prevailing theory suggests that interdimensional travel is possible at some areas of our planet that contain portals to other worlds. Many people have suggested that one of these hotspots exists on Skinwalker Ranch, where UFOs and other strange sightings have been recorded for many years. During an investigation done at the site by Dr. Travis Taylor, he stated that the longer he stayed at the ranch, the stranger things became. He added that he had never seen a UFO in his entire life until he visited the ranch, and now he's seen so many that he's lost count. Following his investigation, Taylor believes that different dimensional planes exist and that these craft are able to travel between them, likely via portals, one of which exists on Skinwalker Ranch. The interdimensional UFO hypothesis is one that's been adopted by many ufologists, since it offers explanations for many of the inexplicable sightings that occur all over the world on a daily basis. And further research into this area may just reveal what many people have suspected for decades, that we live alongside other beings without being aware of them. Many people believe that the US government has developed certain advanced technologies that they've kept a secret and out of the public eye, including the ability to travel through space and time, which is a claim that's been made by a man by the name of Andrew Basiago. Basiago came forward in 2004, claiming that he was part of one of the US government's experiments for a total of 5 years, from when he was 7 years old until the age of 12. He says that the program, named Project Pegasus, was undertaken by the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, also known as DARPA, and that the aim of the program was to develop time travel and teleportation. It served as a precursor to 2 other well-known projects, named the Montauk Project and the Philadelphia Experiment, both of which focused on bending time and space to make time travel and interdimensional travel possible. Basiago claims he was chosen to participate in the program as a child, since the government felt that children could merely adapt to the strain of traveling through time and space. According to Basiago, he was one of 140 children that were chosen for the program, But they were joined by 60 adults who also participated, one of which was his father, who accompanied him on his first journey. He says that on that day, he and his father were led to a field of energy that they were instructed to pass through, and they did so while holding hands. As they entered the energy field, he says that they started to speed up, but it felt like they were at a standstill at the same time. He describes the machinery that was used as 2 gray elliptical booms that stood around 8 feet tall. The booms stood around 10 feet apart, and stretched between them was this curtain of energy that he and his father passed through. He adds that this radiant energy was first discovered by Nikola Tesla, and that it has the ability to alter space and time by bending it. The machines were, however, not discovered until after Tesla's passing in 1943, when they were left behind in his apartment. Many believe that this is how we will eventually master interdimensional travel, since it would be easy to jump from one point to another that's light years away, if we're able to bring those points together by bending the space and time between them. Basiago claims that he witnessed 8 different types of technology that were able to alter time and space while he was enrolled in the program, and that he made several jumps, each different from the last since they were in different realities and existed along different timelines. Since he made multiple jumps, he recalls running into himself on 2 different occasions, since he was sent back to the same moment in history, but from a different point in the future, which made it possible for him to exist in 2 places at the same time. On one occasion, he observed himself from an earlier jump as he visited Ford's Theater during Abraham Lincoln's assassination in 1865. But he says that he never saw the event actually take place, and he started to worry that someone might notice that there were 2 of him in the theater. He traveled back to Ford's Theater a total of 6 times, which resulted in him observing himself during one of the earlier jumps that he made. On a previous occasion, he'd been supplied with the means to explain his presence in the past in case he got caught, which was a letter that was addressed to Navy Secretary Gideon Welles. Basiago says that during that particular jump, he traveled back to the Gettysburg Address after being dressed as a Union bugle boy. Remarkably, he claims that he's been photographed while he was there, and he still owns a copy of the photo, in which he can be seen standing in a field in Gettysburg, surrounded by a few other boys. In the background, a crowd has gathered to listen to the address, and many people have pointed out that he stands out among the other people in the photo as if he doesn't belong there. When asked why his shoes appeared too big in the photo, he explained that during the journey, his shoes disappeared, and when he appeared on the other side, he was given a pair that was too big for him. He did his best to fit in though, and luckily no one became suspicious, since they were focusing on Lincoln's speech. When the photo was scrutinized more closely, it was found that it was indeed taken at the Gettysburg Address, as Basiago claims that the photographer was likely a man by the name of Matthew Brady. But the photo isn't only remarkable for its inclusion of a time traveler, since it's believed to be the first photo that was found to show Lincoln at the address. This photo was discovered by a woman named Josephine Cobb while she was viewing a glass plate of the photo in 1952, and most historians believe that it shows Lincoln in the crowd with his hat removed. In an attempt to explain how his jumps were possible, Basiago likens it to soap bubbles that are being blown in different directions. He says that when the bubble closes, he finds himself in another timeline, and in a different area in space, but still on our planet. Many people are skeptical of Basiago's claims, but Wilfred Weber, who's considered an expert on political implications of alien beings living on our planet, says that the government has had access to time and interdimensional travel for at least 40 years, but that these technologies are used exclusively by the Defense Department of the United States. This has caused quite a bit of controversy, since many people believe such technologies should be used to better the lives of everyday people, rather than keeping it hoarded by the government. But others consider this to be a good thing, since these technologies may have far-reaching implications, such as social and economic disruptions. But when Basiago decided to run for president in the United States in 2016, he suggested that these technologies be disclosed to the public so that they could also benefit from their implementation. He also stated that he has knowledge of future events, one of which is that he'll be elected president or vice president between the years of 2016 and 2028. He claims that he remembers his father making a note in the past, suggesting that Donald Trump would be elected president of the US, and we now know that this did indeed happen. But only time will tell if Basiago will follow in his footsteps. People who claim to have been visited by beings from another dimension often describe them as humanoid, but not quite human. Other accounts describe them as looking entirely alien and nothing like a human, leading many people to believe that these beings could come from one of the many dimensions of our universes, their appearance being a reflection of the world that they live in. But in 1801, a strange event unfolded on the Japanese coast when a strange craft washed ashore, and its inhabitant, a human-looking woman, was discovered within, and to this day, a debate is still ongoing whether she was an extraterrestrial being or a human from a parallel universe. In the early stages of that year, Japanese fishermen spotted something floating in the waves just off the shore, and thinking that it was one of their boats, they rowed closer to investigate, but they could not have been prepared for what they found. As they approached, they realized that it wasn't one of their boats, and instead it looked like a craft that should be flying in the sky. They described the vessel as similar in appearance to a rice pot or a cauldron, noting that it had a heavy metal bottom and a top section that appeared to be made of rosewood or a similar material. Set into the woods was a series of latticed windows, and when the strange object eventually washed ashore, people flocked around it to study the strange markings and the advanced technology that they'd never seen before. A few of the onlookers ventured closer and decided to peer in through the windows, and this is when they made a remarkable discovery. There was someone moving around inside the vessel, and they didn't quite know what to make of it. But while deciding what to do, one of the vessel's panels suddenly flew open and a woman emerged. Some sources say that she looked distinctly human, while others claim that she had an otherworldly presence about her. The vessel is referred to in literature as the Hollow Ship, and it's been mentioned in different publications since 1868, but one of the earliest accounts was written in 1825. In this account, it's mentioned that the woman's ship measured around 16.5 feet in diameter, and that it washed ashore close to the Hitachi province. The woman who emerged from the vessel is described as being immeasurably beautiful, and that she had red hair with white highlights that some witnesses claimed it looked more like fur than hair. She was dressed in material that they were unfamiliar with, and the local women noted that her dress was closed around her neck while being open closer to her feet, and many of the women stated they would like to wear a similar garment. Strangely, the woman also held a wooden box close to her chest, and she refused to let anyone take it from her or look inside. When they tried to communicate with her, they found that she neither spoke nor understood Japanese, so they tried to learn more about her from what they could see inside the vessel. There, they discovered that she'd been drinking water and eating mints, and some kind of cake. The vessel was outfitted with bedding, supplies, and decorations, suggesting that she knew she would be out in the open water for some time. At first, many of the onlookers believed that she was a princess that hailed from some faraway land. They speculated that she may have been forced to marry someone she didn't love, and so took to the open sea inside of her strange boat. This belief came about thanks to the box that she was clutching close to her chest, which some of the witnesses believed contained the head of her lover, and hence she didn't want anyone to look inside. This theory was further bolstered by the strange markings on the side of the vessel. Since they were unable to read any of the script, they assumed that she'd traveled from either Britain, India, or America. One would assume that anyone making such a strange discovery would want to learn more about the woman, her vessel, and her origins, but strangely this wasn't the case. Instead, witnesses realized that if the lord of their territory were to learn about the mysterious woman, they may order the witnesses to conduct a thorough investigation, and so they decided that it would be better to send her back where she came from. And so they placed her back into the strange boat and sent her back out to sea. In an account written by a man named Shuichi Kamon, it's noted that the onlookers realized that this was a cruel thing to do, but they ultimately decided that this was the woman's destiny. Another account of the incident was a slightly different narrative. In this instance, the fishermen rowed out to the boat thinking it was empty, but just as they reached the vessel, the woman appeared from the top and climbed down while clutching the strange wooden box. Due to her strange appearance, they instantly assumed that she was the reincarnation of the Bodhisattva statue, which is situated at the Shofukuji temple. But they soon realized that this could not be the case since she spoke a language that they'd never heard before. Noticing that the woman refused to let go of the wooden box, the captain became suspicious, and he climbed up the side of the craft to see what else she was hiding. This was when he noticed that she had near-complete living quarters inside the boat. When he noticed the strange writing on the side of the boat's panels, He became concerned and quickly climbed back down. The witnesses on the beach had become suspicious of the woman by this point, and it became clear to the captain that she was frightened, as she kept looking around as if she expected to be apprehended at any moment. Realizing that they were making the woman feel uncomfortable, the captain apologized to her for his fellow sailors and the crowd's behavior, and after performing a deep apologetic bow, he said his farewells and ordered his men to get back in their own boat. They then began to row away from the woman, but as they did so, the captain turned to take one last look at her and saw her getting back into her vessel and drifting out to sea once more. As soon as the woman was out of sight, news of her appearance and her strange boat started spreading, and it's a tale that's still recounted in Japan today. Many people believe that she was a human from a parallel universe who accidentally ended up in our reality, and that she must have been just as bewildered as the witnesses that found her on the beach. Others think that she was actually an extraterrestrial being that crash-landed in the ocean, but it's a mystery that will likely never have a definitive answer. In 1987, Sarah Mcdermid and her parents, Peter and Sheila, immigrated from Scotland to Melbourne, Australia, in search of a better life. The Mcdermids were excited to swap the gloomy Scottish weather for eternal sunshine, and within months they'd settled into their new environment. 20-year-old Sarah had no trouble finding a new group of friends, and she also obtained a position at Heath Underwriters in Melbourne's central business district. Just 3 years into their latest adventure, Sarah disappeared in what's become one of Australia's most baffling true crime cases. In July of 1990, Sarah sent a cheerful letter to her friend in Scotland. She just purchased a red Honda Civic and outlined her plans for the future in the letter. She promised her friend that the two would travel the lengths and breadths of Australia, driving from Melbourne to Sydney, Brisbane, and back. Sarah had planned to take a month's leave from work so the two friends could have ample time to travel and catch up. Those who worked with Sarah described her as a happy and outgoing 23-year-old. At the time, Sarah still lived at home with her parents and hoped to own her own home one day. In July of 1990, the lives of the Mcdermids were shaken when Sarah failed to return home one warm evening. July 11th, 1990, started relatively normal for Sarah. She awoke early for work and arrived at the office before 9 a.m. At 5 p.m., Sarah turned off her computer and put down her papers for the day, leaving the office at 5:10 p.m. After work, Sarah walked through the Melbourne CBD to the tennis center, where she met with friends Gavin Thorne and Diane Wright-Smith. The trio spent the evening playing tennis and squash, using the evening to eliminate all their excess energy. At 9:20 p.m., Gavin and Diane and Sarah left the tennis center and headed for Richmond train station. That morning, Sarah had left her car in the parking lot of Kananook train station. She often left her car here and caught the train to avoid heavy Melbourne traffic every morning. The journey home for Sarah would have been straightforward, but as soon as she reached the station, there was a hitch in the road. Sarah and her friends discovered that they'd missed their train on the Frankston line. Instead of waiting in the dark, they decided to catch a train to Caulfield, where they could change onto the Frankston line. According to Searching for Sarah, the group arrived at Caulfield train station at 9:39 p.m. and made the connecting train. A short while later, the train slowly pulled into the Bond Beach train station, where Gavin and Diane said their goodbyes. Sarah was now on the train alone. Luckily for Sarah, her stop was a mere 5 minutes away, and at 10:20 p.m., the train pulled into Kananook train station. Witnesses recalled seeing Sarah alighting the train and making her way through the station, her bright green tracksuit and tennis racket making her distinctive amongst the small crowd of commuters. At around 10:30 p.m., people near the dimly lit car park of Kananook train station heard a woman shouting, "Give me back my keys, stop fooling around." It's unknown whether anybody investigated the source of the noise, and perhaps if they had, they could have prevented what happened next. Seconds later, a piercing, high-pitched scream rang out into the night. Sheila and Peter Mcdermid lay awake in bed, waiting to hear the familiar click of keys in the door, but the Mcdermid home lay silent. Hours later, the pair searched the house for their daughter, Sarah, who had not made it home the night before. Her car wasn't outside in the driveway, and she hadn't called or left a note. The two began to panic, but hoped that Sarah may have simply been with a friend and forgotten to tell them. Panicked, Sheila, Sarah's mother, called Heath Underwriters, and what she learned made her stomach churn. Sarah had failed to show up for work. Sheila immediately dialed 000 and requested the presence of the Victoria police. By mid-afternoon, police had arrived at the Mcdermid home. At around 2 p.m., after taking statements from both Peter and Sheila, the Victoria police arrived at Kananook train station, close to Frankston. Officers discovered Sarah's beloved red Honda Civic in the parking lot when they arrived at the scene. According to investigators, they found several red stains underneath the driver's side door. These stains were also seen on the ground next to the adjacent car. As they looked past the car, they discovered a worrying clue. Several drag marks were discovered from Sarah's car into the nearby bushes. Officers braced themselves for what they might find in those bushes, but there was no sign of Sarah. An intensive search of the Kananook train station was conducted, but nothing was found. Sarah's cigarette lighter was located on the floor close to the drag marks. The search that followed pulled in as many resources as humanly possible. Volunteers, search and rescue, and police officers combed the Kananook area looking for any sign of Sarah. After several weeks, the search was scaled down due to a lack of evidence. To Victoria investigators, it appears as though Sarah had vanished into thin air. In the years since Sarah's disappearance, there have been several people of interest, including the Frankston serial killer, Paul Denyer. Denyer is responsible for taking the lives of at least 3 women in the summer of 1993 in Tynong North and Frankston, Victoria. In recent years, Paul Denyer has applied for parole. However, this has been denied. Denyer's been interviewed at length about Sarah's case, but has never taken responsibility for Sarah's disappearance. In July of 2020, on the 30th anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, the Daily Mail revealed the Victoria police had a new and bizarre person of interest. According to the Daily Mail, Jody Jones, a Frankston street worker, has been named as a suspect in Sarah's disappearance. Jody, along with 3 accomplices, are believed to have attacked Sarah while she was walking through the dimly lit parking lot that brisk evening. Jones has been interviewed, and little more is known about this angle of the investigation. Bindali Debs, an infamous Australian serial killer who targeted police officers, has also been named as a person of interest, although the full scope of this investigation remains unknown. In 2004, the Victoria government raised the reward to $1 million Australian dollars, or about 681,000 US dollars. Sarah's parents, Sheila and Peter, told ABCAU that they no longer care about penalties or punishments for those involved. They just want their daughter's remains back. Sarah's disappearance is one of the most widely publicized unsolved cases in Australia, and for 33 years, the person responsible has remained elusive. If you have any information, you're asked to contact the Victoria Police Frankston Station at 03-9784-5555 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. 47-year-old Cheryl Levitt of Springston, Missouri, worked hard to provide for her 2 children, Susie and Bart Streeter. Cheryl worked as a hairdresser in the local community, and the family had amassed many close friends. Cheryl and Susie were regarded as being kind, level-headed women who would go out of their way to help anyone. By June of 1992, 18-year-old Susie Streeter had graduated from high school and was looking toward the future. She and her best friend, Stacy McCall, planned to spend the evening of their graduation celebrating, but instead the 3 would be caught up in one of the US's most bizarre disappearances. June 6, 1992, was a special day for Susie and Stacy. That afternoon, the 2 walked across the stage, donned their caps and gowns, and collected their diplomas. The 2 had officially graduated from Kickapoo High School, and now had to decide what their futures held. During the ceremony, the 2 spoke about college, university, and the world of work. Once the ceremony was over, Stacy and Susie joined their peers at the various graduation parties that were being held around Springfield. The pair had planned on staying at a hotel in Branson, Missouri after the party, but that evening they made a snap decision that would change the course of their lives forever. The 2 no longer wished to drive to Branson, and instead decided to stay at the home of their friend, Janelle Kirby. Upon arrival, Stacy and Susie saw that the party at Janelle's was in full swing, and the 2 got stuck in. Stacy called her mom, letting her know the change of plans. The 2 girls made their way through the crowd, talking to friends as they passed. As one might imagine, a house full of 18-year-old new graduates was incredibly rowdy, and in the early morning hours, the festivities were broken up when the police were called to Janelle's home. The teens agreed to close the party and begin to leave. At around 2 a.m., Stacy and Susie said goodbye to Janelle after there'd been another change of plans. The two would now be staying at Susie's home, which she shared with her mother, Sarah Mcdermid, at 1717 East Delmar Street in Springfield. Stacy and Susie hopped into the car, waving goodbye to their friends for what would become the last time. As far as investigators know, the two girls made it to 1717 East Delmar Street, but what happened to them after that remains a complete mystery. Hours later, Janelle and her boyfriend arrived at Delmar Street to collect Stacy and Susie. As part of their graduation celebration, they'd all planned to visit a local water park. Janelle and her boyfriend knocked at the door and waited, but there was no sign of the girls. Janelle would later tell investigators she noticed something bizarre the moment she walked up to the door. The porch light had been smashed, leaving glass all over the porch. Unaware that the three women were in danger or missing, Janelle and her boyfriend cleaned up the scene. Janelle later told investigators the front door to the Streeter home was unlocked, and when they stepped inside, they were met with a wave of eerie silence. They assumed Susie and Stacy had already headed to the water park, but the home phone rang just as they were about to leave. Thinking it may have been a call from the girls, Janelle answered. On the other end of the line, a male voice rolled off graphic and lewd statements, laughing when he sensed Janelle's discomfort. Suitably freaked out, Janelle and her boyfriend left and headed for the water park for a day of fun. Stacy and Susie never arrived at the park, and that's when Janelle began to panic. She decided to go back to the Streeter home and was this time met by Janice McCall, Stacy McCall's mother. Janice had also been looking for the girls, and the sense of urgency between the two heightened. Janelle explained the events of the night before and how she had found the home empty. Janice wasted no time in contacting the Springfield Police Department to report her daughter, her friend, and her mother missing. The Springfield police arrived at the scene minutes later. Unfortunately, much of the crime scene was considered tampered with due to the number of people who came in and out of the Streeter home that day. Janelle and her boyfriend had inadvertently destroyed physical evidence and also deleted a voicemail from the family's phone. This voicemail was said to have been from the man who called Janelle, making lewd statements and thinly veiled threats. When investigators entered the home, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The women's clothes were found neatly folded, and the beds appeared to have been slept in. According to the Springfield News Leader, there was evidence to suggest the girls were getting ready for bed at the time of their attack. Flannels used to remove makeup were still damp when the Springfield police arrived. The three women's handbags were neatly placed on the stairs, and investigators found an overturned book and glasses in Cheryl's home, as if she'd been disturbed while reading. Whatever had happened to the women happened sometime between 2:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. As per reports, the women had left behind their car keys, money, jewelry, clothes, and Cheryl's beloved Yorkshire Terrier, Cinnamon. Word of the women's disappearance quickly hit Springfield. The residents rallied behind law enforcement and the missing girls' families. The FBI joined the search days after the three were officially reported missing. Despite the intensive searches and investigations that have taken place over the years, no sign of the women has ever been found. There are several theories floating around Springfield, but until the women are found, it's too hard to discern truth from fiction. In 1992, the TV show America's Most Wanted received a strange call from a man claiming to have vital information about the case. The call was passed over to the Springfield Police Department, but before the man could speak, he was disconnected. The Springfield Police Department and FBI had made several appeals for the young man to come forward, but he never did. Other tips have been called in over the years, but all of them have led to dead ends. There are also many suspects, from Susie's ex-boyfriend Dustin to hardened criminal Robert Cox, and it's essential to note that nobody has ever been charged with the women's disappearances. The mystery of the Springfield Three persists to this day. How could two high school graduates and one of their mothers disappear from the face of the earth? Residents of East Delmar Street reported seeing a suspicious green Dodge van the day that they disappeared. One resident even told investigators she saw a woman matching Susie's description in the passenger seat of the van. The witness was not able to get a look at the man driving the van, but according to their report, they heard a man's voice say, "Don't do anything stupid." This sighting has never been confirmed, and the people of Springfield continue to honor the memory of Suzanne Streeter, Stacy McCall, and Cheryl Levitt. Anyone with information is urged to contact Corporal Matt Farmer of the Springfield Police Department at 417-864-1810, quoting case number 9240169B. The life of Walter Dunson was a long and illustrious one. Walter served in World War I before settling in Ohio, where he fathered 9 children. Walter was known to be a simple and honest man who was very self-reliant and apparently somewhat distrustful of the government and other institutions. He had been a staple at his church for many decades, but one day Walter simply stopped showing up. Given his old age, many assumed that he had taken ill, but the truth would be much darker. According to records, Walter was born sometime in July of 1900 or 1899 in Marietta, Georgia. At the onset of World War I, Walter felt compelled to help, and that's why his birth year is up for contention, as it's believed he faked it in order to enlist. When the US became involved in the war, Walter knew it was time to act. He saw several battles and was awarded a Bronze Star for his bravery, and his time in the theater of war changed him forever, as it did with millions of others. Once the war was over, Walter and his comrades were shipped back to the US and expected to carry on with their lives. Walter moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he settled down and fathered 9 children. Day in and day out, Walter worked his shift at the foundry, waiting for the weekend to come. At the weekend, Walter volunteered as an usher at the Calvary Baptist Church in Cincinnati. Those who knew him described him as a very devoted person to his faith, and he was very close with those at the church. In 1970, Walter retired after 4 decades of service. Walter attended services at the Calvary Baptist Church to fill his time, and he became a regular at the Elder Cafe. As old age crept up on the veteran, he decided to move in with his son, Gary Adams, in the late 1970s at 5700 Wyatt Avenue. Gary agreed to take care of his father and the Social Security benefits he received in the mail. Life for the family went on, but sometime in the 1980s, all records of Walter Dunson stopped. It wouldn't be until June 5, 1998, that investigators got their first whiff of his truly bizarre case. On June 5th, Gary called the Cincinnati police to report his 98-year-old dad missing. Gary told investigators the two had visited Finley's Market at around 2 p.m. when Gary stepped into the butcher's to purchase a few items, leaving his father outside. Moments later, when Gary returned, his father was nowhere to be seen. Given that Walter was 98 years old, the Cincinnati Police Department immediately began their search for him and put out additional notices due to his vulnerability. Gary was questioned at length and stuck to his story. Only a handful of witnesses in the area recalled seeing Gary in the company of an older man with gray hair that day. One employee at a shop remembered serving an elderly man who looked like Walter, but other witnesses claimed Gary had been alone. The Cincinnati Police Department quickly discovered a troubling clue. On June 1, 1998, the Social Security Administration sent a letter addressed to Walter, who was living at 5700 Wyatt Avenue. The letter detailed how a member of the SSA could be conducting a home visit to check whether Walter was receiving the correct benefits, but that visit never took place, as 4 days later Walter was reported missing. Investigators were suspicious but lacked substantial evidence. A search of the 5700 Wyatt Avenue home only concerned investigators further. According to court documents, Walter's bedroom was at the top of a steep flight of stairs, which had been unmanageable for a 98-year-old. His bedroom contained very few personal effects, with there being a musty-smelling bed, 2 hospital nightgowns, and a pair of high-top tennis shoes. A search of the bathroom showed no medications for Walter. In the 1970s and early 80s, he'd been hospitalized 3 times with dementia or a stroke. Neighbors of the Adams were questioned, and in the 18 years Walter is alleged to have lived there, they didn't recall seeing him once. Gary's son, who spent time between his mother's and father's house, had even lived in Walter's room for a few months. When asked by the Cincinnati police about his grandfather, he remarked that he'd never met him or heard of him until his father Gary reported him missing in June of 1998. Regulars at the Elder Cafe testified that they stopped seeing Walter sometime around 1980. The Drop-In Center, a homeless shelter that Walter sometimes frequented, also testified that they hadn't seen him since 1979 or 1980. The congregation at the Calvary Baptist Church told investigators a similar story, aside from the pastor, who believes he last saw Walter for the last time around 1986. Official records show Walter's driving license had not been renewed since it expired in the 70s, and he'd not held so much as a library card past 1980. By official record, Walter Dunson dropped off the map in 1980, never to be seen or heard from again. Gary Adams had a competent defense when presented with this evidence. He claimed his father didn't trust banks, doctors, or the government, which would explain why he had not utilized those services since 1980. When asked about the lack of photographs of his father in his house, Gary told the police the family didn't believe in taking photos. While there was not enough evidence to prove Gary had a hand in his father's disappearance, the Social Security Administration did have enough evidence to convict Gary of fraud. In 1999, Gary Adams was found guilty of 25 counts of theft of public funds. According to the Charlie Project, Gary was acquitted of 25 forgery charges, as the prosecution was unable to obtain a handwriting sample from Walter for comparison. Gary Adams was sentenced to 27 months in prison and was ordered to pay restitution. According to the courts, Walter likely passed away sometime between 1980 and 1985, and his son continued to cash his Social Security checks. There are varying accounts of the last time Walter was seen, although witness testimonies are known to be unreliable at best. Gary Adams has never been charged in connection with his father's disappearance, and continues to maintain his innocence. Walter Dunson is described as a black male with gray hair, brown eyes, 5'8" and 150 pounds. He wore dentures and glasses and was last seen wearing a light brown shirt, dark pants, black shoes, and a navy pea coat. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Cincinnati Police Department at 513-352-3542. A few hundred miles from the bustling life of San Francisco sits Humboldt County, California. The county is bursting to the brim with sprawling fields, pastures, and green areas, but despite its beauty, the idyllic country has a dark side. In the late 2010s, amateur sleuths coined the name the Humboldt Five to encompass 5 young women: Jennifer Wilmer, Karen Mitchell, Christine Walters, Sheila Franks, and Danielle Bertolini, who disappeared between 1990 and 2014. 21-year-old Jennifer Wilmer sparked initial intrigue in Humboldt County and brought to light the dark underbelly of a once unassuming county. 21-year-old Jennifer Wilmer was your typical 1990s hippie. She was an adventurous, free spirit who became restless when stuck in one place for too long. Jennifer was a proud member of the Deadheads, a group of young people who followed the band The Grateful Dead around the country. The music scene upon which the band found themselves consisted of hippies and New Age spiritualists looking for a higher purpose in life. Jennifer was powerfully attracted to this way of life and quickly latched on. In 1992, Jennifer earned herself a full scholarship to study at St. John's University in New York. Jennifer and her parents were thrilled, and that year, she left her Long Island home to enroll and start her studies. Unfortunately, Jennifer's academic career at St. John's University was short-lived, as she dropped out after just one term. After dropping out, Jennifer headed to Arcata, California, where she planned to enroll at the College of Redwoods. Unfortunately for Jennifer, by the time she arrived in California, the admission period for the year was over, and she was forced to consider other possibilities. This setback didn't rattle her though, and in fact, she told her mother she'd moved to California because she wanted to make it on her own and forge her own path. Jennifer picked up jobs as a waitress and spent time with her boyfriend, Tro Patterson, who was an Arcata native. Tro introduced Jennifer to the Arcata Plaza, a place where other disillusioned youths would hang out. Here, hippies, goths, and all manner of subcultures would gather to talk about life and their experiences. The general mood of the plaza was laid back, and those who became a regular fixture were given a nickname, so Jennifer became Jade. In mid-1993, Jennifer moved in with her boyfriend, Tro, and his 3 roommates after her roommate abruptly left town. By this point, the magic and wonder of Arcata had worn off for Jennifer, and she was struggling with depression. Money was a source of anguish for Jennifer, and she'd been struggling to get by waitressing. One of her new roommates suggested she visit the farm down the road to introduce herself for the upcoming season, where they would need workers. This is where the version of events becomes murky. The Charlie Project states that there are two versions of Jennifer's final moments. First, she left at 7:30 a.m. on September 13, 1993, to hitch a ride along Route 299 to the farm, around 10 miles from her home. The second account is that Jennifer left on September 13, 1993, to travel to an agency to collect a plane ticket to New York. Jennifer had been struggling with being away from her family and had fallen into depression. Jennifer's parents later confirmed they'd purchased a ticket for her, but were informed by the travel agency that it hadn't been picked up. Either way, Jennifer left behind a note for her boyfriend and housemates that read, "Bye everybody. Went to my first day at the farm. Wish you luck. Good luck to you, Mingo, and see you in a few months. If someone could give food to the kittens as needed, I'd appreciate it. Hopefully I'll see you folks later. Signed, Jade." When Jennifer did not return that evening, her housemates were not too concerned, but their worry grew as days wore on. On September 15th, they stopped by the farm to check in on Jennifer, only to learn she had never arrived. Panicked, her friends contacted Jennifer's family, who called the Trinity County Sheriff's Office to report their daughter missing. The Trinity County Sheriff's Office and the Arcata Police Department shared the same opinion when Jennifer's case was put on their desk. They believed she was just another hippie who'd moved on to the next town without telling her parents. Jennifer's mother, Susan, had been very vocal concerning what she called the lax investigation performed by both agencies. Susan Wilmer continued to push both police departments, who refused to take her daughter's case seriously. Susan took it upon herself to fly from New York to California to search for herself. Upon examining her home, they discovered Jennifer had left behind her ID, clothes, address book, Bible, and sleeping bag. Susan told Billy Jensen no self-respecting hippie leaves her sleeping bag. It would take years before the Trinity County Sheriff's Office took Jennifer's disappearance seriously. In 1997, Karen Mitchell disappeared from Eureka, just 8 miles from Arcata, under bizarre circumstances. In 2008, Christine Walkers disappeared from Eureka too, and finally in 2014, Sheila Franks and Danielle Bertolini disappeared from Eureka within just days of each other. All 5 women were interested in counterculture, politics, and spirituality. It would take this rash of disappearances for investigators to take Jennifer's disappearance seriously, and she became the catalyst behind the Humboldt Five. Despite the new attention and eyes on Jennifer's case, little movement has been made, and her family still desperately searches for answers. If still alive today, Jennifer Jade Wilmer would be 51 years old. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Joshua Ford of the Trinity County Sheriff's Office at 530-623-2611, quoting case number 935-6740. 31-year-old Narin Brown and her husband, John Brown, had built a comfortable life for themselves in the neighborhood of New Hyde Park, New York. The pair had met at work years earlier and instantly fell in love with each other. Within a matter of years, the couple were wed and welcomed their first child into the world. Life for the Browns went on, with each December being a double cause for celebration. But Narin's birthday fell on December 13th. December 13th, 1990 should have been Narin's 32nd birthday, but a traumatizing event would tarnish this joyous occasion. Narin was born on December 13th, 1958 in Long Island, New York. She came from a background of mixed ancestry, Japanese and German, and she enjoyed exploring both sides of her cultures. Narin's family ensured they celebrated their cultures and that their children understood their practices. In the 1970s, Narin graduated from Uniondale High School and entered the workforce, where she met John Brown. The two fell in love and were married soon after. After getting married, she and John moved into New Hyde Park, New York, purchasing what would become the family home. She and John quickly blended into their new environment, and years later, they found out they were expecting. The two would have a second child, and by 1990, the family had slipped into their new lives. The Browns' relationship appeared idyllic to the outside world, but one chilly December evening would turn that notion on its head. On December 12, 1990, Narin spent the afternoon getting into the Christmas spirit. There was nothing she loved more than seeing her children's faces light up when they saw snow outside, or decorations appearing around the house. That evening, she decided to bake special Christmas cookies for the kids, but found she was missing some very vital ingredients. She went about her regular nightly routine with the children, feeding them, bathing them, and putting them to sleep. Once the house had fallen silent, she left her New Hyde Park home for the Pathmark Supercenter at 11 p.m. According to John, she left in her station wagon, with him anticipating that she'd be home in a matter of minutes. The Pathmark Supercenter, which is now closed, was located around a mile from their home. John told investigators he fell asleep on the sofa shortly after his wife left for the store, and didn't realize anything was amiss until the following day. When John awoke on Narin's birthday, he sensed something was off. Narin was nowhere to be found, nor was her car. John called her friend, Elaine, to ask whether Narin had possibly spent the night at her house. John was shocked to learn that his wife had not spent the evening with Elaine, so where was she? According to reports, John asked Elaine to visit the Pathmark Supercenter to look for any sign of Narin and her car, while he took care of the children. Hours later, John received a call that would turn his stomach inside out. Narin's station wagon was found abandoned in the store's parking lot. Her friends described her as a devoted mother who was never out of contact with her loved ones, and stated that this behavior was extremely out of character. After learning that her car had been found abandoned, John reported his wife missing to the Nassau County Police Department. When the Nassau police searched the scene, they found Narin's car was locked, but there were wrapped Christmas presents inside. According to the Charlie Project, employees at the Pathmark Supercenter were unable to confirm whether Narin had been in the store that night. Some witnesses claim to have seen her car at 11 p.m., while others state that they saw it at around 2 a.m. There were no first-hand sightings of Narin herself, though. Investigators quickly surmised that Narin had only intended to be out of the house for a short while, as she'd only taken $45 with her, leaving behind her ID, wallet, and everything else. Her disappearance rocked her friends, who began actively campaigning for her. They spent hours placing missing person posters throughout New Hyde Park and beyond, hoping to get tips. Shortly into the investigation, doubts began creeping into the mind of Elaine. According to the Charlie Project, Elaine told the Nassau County Police Department that Narin and John had a rocky relationship, and feared that he may have harmed her. On December 13, 1990, John admitted that the two had gotten into an argument before she left for the store. The nature of the argument has never been revealed, but for some, it's enough to cast a shadow of suspicion. John's behavior only became more bizarre as the investigation continued. John Brown lawyered up and refused to let the NCPD search the family home or the grounds. He told the media and the authorities he believed his wife had gotten into a disagreement in the Pathmark Supercenter parking lot that evening. There's no physical evidence to prove or disprove this theory. According to the Nassau County Police, John Brown is no longer a suspect in his wife's disappearance. In the years following Narin's disappearance, John Brown remarried and continued to raise their children, reminding them of their brilliant mother. The NCPD have little to work with and virtually no physical evidence or eyewitness testimony. Investigators hope that new evidence will come to light one day to lead them to Narin Brown. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Nassau County Police Department at 516-573-8800. Quoting case number 203-CR00-80544. Back in the 1800s, it was not uncommon for sailors to spend months at a time on the oceans, either as they explored the world around them, or while they were transporting goods between continents. Many of these men would return to shore after a long and arduous journey, with fantastical tales to tell of the sights and sounds that they experienced while out at sea. And not all of them were pleasant. While the sense of nature and the promise of finding new lands must have been very alluring, ships would often encounter pirates that had a singular goal in mind: to raid any ships that they encountered and to do away with any witnesses that may give away their true identities. They also had to endure vicious storms that could last for weeks on end, and in many of those cases, neither the ships nor the crewmen were ever seen again, as they were lost to the dark depths of the ocean. The dangers of being out on the open ocean would have been near endless, as there was always the risk of disease breaking out on a ship, or that supplies would run out before they could make landfall. In some of the worst cases, ships would get blown off course, leaving the ship and its crew to trawl the waters, hoping to catch a glimpse of land where they could fetch water and fresh supplies. But those who completed their journeys successfully also had tales to tell, and one of these encounters is still spoken about today, as it was witnessed by several people, all of whom swear that it's a true account of what happened. The ship in question was named the HMS Daedalus, which was built in 1826 in order to serve the Royal Navy. But after its construction was completed, it was placed in reserve, and it wouldn't be until 1836 that it would be put to use. At this time, the ship became part of the Navy's Mediterranean fleet, and after completing that stint, it was re-rated as a corvette, the smallest class of warship that, in this case, only held 20 cannons. By 1845, pirates had become a serious nuisance in the waters surrounding New Zealand, and the HMS Daedalus was sent there to aid other ships that were already attempting to curtail the pirates' raids. Thereafter, the battle against pirates continued in the South China Sea, as they'd started to attack ships around Borneo, and Daedalus was once again sent to lend a hand to her fellow ships. After a 2-year stint against the pirates, the ship was ordered to return home to England, and the crew started their journey back to New Zealand, Australia, and Hong Kong. 18 months later, the Daedalus had reached the Cape of Good Hope, where the Flying Dutchman was said to make an occasional appearance, and the Daedalus's crew was about to encounter something just as terrifying. One of the midshipmen noticed something in the water that he could not identify, and so he reported to his superior officers, who immediately investigated. Both the sailing master and the first lieutenant, Edgar Drummond, rushed to the side of the ship, and they were shocked by what they saw. They would later recount the event, stating that a massive animal of a type they had never encountered was swimming a short distance away from the ship, and it appeared to be approaching them. The ship's captain, a man named Peter McQuay, described the beast as a massive serpent that swam with its head constantly above the water's surface. He also noted that the creature's head resembled that of a snake, which made it even more terrifying, and they kept a close eye on it as they were uncertain what it meant to do. The serpent passed very close to the ship, according to the captain, and it was so close that they could make out distinctive features, such as a strange type of mane that ran down its back, though they thought this may have been seaweed that the creature was inadvertently dragging along with it. They found it strange that the beast seemed to have no fins to propel it through the water, and they assumed that it was using its body to do so by undulating against the water. The serpent was swimming fast at around 15 miles per hour, but as it passed by the ship, they attempted to take a measurement by comparing the creature's length to that of the ship's main topsail, and they estimated it was at least 60 feet long, though this was only part of the animal that they could see. The men estimated that at least another 30 feet of the creature was hidden under the water, and guessed that it used this section of its tail to guide it through the waves. But most frightening of all was the serpent's mouth, which was described as massive. The crewmen estimated that it would be able to swallow a man whole, since its mouth, when opened, was large enough to fit an upright, tall man between the upper and lower jaws. Adding to their horror was the sight that they saw when the creature opened its mouth fully, as it was packed with what they described as razor-sharp teeth. At first, the crew debated whether they should follow the creature, and perhaps try to capture it, but they decided against it as it would have led them far off course, and instead, Drummond made a sketch of the beast, while McQuay compiled a report on the incident. 2 months later, the Daedalus had returned to England, and newspaper outlets caught wind of the sailor's fantastical tale. They started reporting on the sighting of a massive and ferocious sea serpent, and members of the public were captivated by the story, not least because they now believed that the existence of sea serpents had been confirmed by credible and well-trained witnesses. But not everyone was as eager to accept the sailor's versions of events. Many members of the scientific community theorized that the men had mistaken a common animal for a sea serpent, and it was suggested that it may have been an elephant seal rather than a deadly monster. Others thought it may have simply been a large piece of seaweed that had become dislodged from the ocean floor, but Captain McQuay remained insistent that what they saw was a living animal that looked nothing like an elephant seal or any other animal that any of the men on board had ever seen. In the years and decades to come, there would be many more sightings of similar beasts, but no definitive proof was ever brought back to shore, and so the existence of these creatures is still a topic of debate in modern times. The Greek philosopher Plato lived between 423 BC and 347 BC. and he was the first to write about the mythical and much searched for city of Atlantis, which he estimated to have existed about 9,000 years before his writings. According to legend, Atlantis was ruled by Atlas, one of Poseidon's 10 sons, after he inherited Poseidon's kingdom since he was the oldest. To bring homage to his father, Atlas had a massive golden statue of Poseidon riding in a chariot that was being pulled by large winged horses, and placed it inside a temple that was so high that it reached into the clouds above. The city was said to be surrounded by tall towers and massive gates to keep it safe, and these are rumored to have been decorated with precious metals. The city itself was completely self-sustaining, with irrigation systems that fed to the farms where crops were grown and animals were reared. The buildings inside the city were said to be made from red and black stone, and the people who lived in these buildings were rumored to be half human and half god. These tales about the lost city of Atlantis are infamous, but no one knows whether it actually existed, and if so, where it was situated. Plato was of the opinion that Atlantis was situated somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, but extensive searches have been carried out in the areas that he outlined without any success, and it's now mostly accepted that if it existed, the city was built elsewhere. Other theories on the city's location state that it may lie under Antarctica, and that it sank beneath the Mediterranean somewhere between Spain and Morocco. As for the size of the city, it's said that it was larger than Libya and Asia combined, while the Christian mystic Edgar Cayce suggested that it was about the size of Eurasia, which is Europe and Asia combined. As for how Atlantis became submerged beneath the ocean, according to mythology, the inhabitants of Atlantis invoked the wrath of the gods when they began living immorally and they gave in to greed. This resulted in the gods sending fire to rain down on them for an entire night, accompanied by earthquakes that shook the city's foundations, ultimately causing it to sink beneath the waves. And ever since, people have speculated about its existence. In 2014, new evidence was discovered that may bring the question of whether Atlantis ever existed, as well as its location, to a close. For many years, researchers had knowledge of a set of ruins that's located just off the coast of the Greek island known as Delos, but they didn't pay the ruins much attention, since it was presumed that they were the vestiges of an ancient port that had disappeared beneath the waters long ago. But when they finally decided to conduct a closer inspection, they were surprised to find that they were wrong. The ruins actually belonged to an ancient city that was swallowed by the ocean as far back as a century BC. Instead of finding small sections of a port as expected, divers from the National Hellenic Research Foundation and the Greek Ministry of Culture came across columns that were part of buildings, a kiln, and clay pots that would have been made in the kiln. It was immediately noted that the kiln bore a remarkable resemblance to those discovered at the Herculaneum as well as Pompeii. But the ruins weren't the only discovery that was made. When the Underwater Antiquities conducted an underwater archaeological excavation in the same waters, they discovered that there had indeed been a port as well. But they were even more excited when they also found a trove of shipwrecks dating from different eras in history, and it was confirmed that Delos, in its heyday, was an important site for international trading, and that it lay along a busy trade route between the East and West Mediterranean. It's now believed that these ruins are the oldest of their kind, and they date back to around 2800 BC to 1200 BC. The ruins were found to be part of a town that was very well planned out, as they showed signs of different streets, including a main street, religious buildings, courtyards, and tombstones. Some of the pottery that was found at the site dates back as far as the Stone Age, which means that initial estimates of the age of the ruins were off by around 1200 years, since they're now thought to be at least 5,000 years old. There was also evidence that the new buildings had been constructed before the city disappeared, suggesting that it was expanding even further and that the city was indeed very prosperous. This theory was bolstered by the discovery of a massive building that is thought to have been the town hall, which would have been used by people that were held in high regard at the time. Local inhabitants have told researchers that older generations in the area always knew that there were ruins beneath the water, but they had no idea that it would be this large or the importance that it would hold. There's a lot more excavation to be done, since the entire site is estimated to be around 18 square miles in size, and only time will tell what other treasures are to be found in the sunken city. These new discoveries may also shed some light as to whether Atlantis has finally been discovered. Many people are hopeful, but there are some skeptics that either believe Atlantis is a myth or that it's actually buried elsewhere. One Greek researcher has stated that many people think Atlantis could be located in the Bermuda Triangle, somewhere on the Spanish-Portuguese coast or somewhere between Crete and Thera. But he believes that all of these theories are correct, since Atlantis was much larger than first theorized. He believes that it was so large, in fact, that all of these sites contain remnants of Atlantis, which was not a city but a continent that had a population of around 60 million people. He believes that Egypt, the Aztecs, and the Maya were all part of the continent of Atlantis, since their theories are very similar according to prehistoric relics that were found in each of these locations. He added that there are also similarities in these civilizations' dialects, the names given to their gods and names given to certain locations in each of these areas, and he's convinced that they're linked. But for now, this is all mere speculation, as many people believe Atlantis is nothing more than a tall tale that was dreamed up by Plato. Others believe that researchers are searching in the wrong locations, and it's been suggested that Atlantis is actually located in Palestine, the Canary Islands, Scandinavia, or elsewhere in the Americas. Cryptozoology is practiced by many people who are interested in the unknown, and many of these researchers have stumbled across animals and creatures that no one has been able to identify. Some photos and videos show humanoid creatures with impossibly long limbs, pale skin, and glowing red eyes, which some people believe are a cryptid called skinwalkers. There's also the ongoing search for Bigfoot and the Yeti, the ever-elusive creatures that many people are convinced really exist either on snowy mountaintops or in dense woodlands all over the world. In other instances, weird and unidentifiable creatures have washed up on beaches in countries the world over, and despite thorough tests and research being conducted on these animals, many of them still remain a mystery. There are also beasts that were once thought to be merely mythical, but every once in a while a piece of footage or photo emerges that purports to show one of these creatures alive and well, such as the infamous Mothman, a massive creature that is half man, half moth, and is said to appear in areas where a natural disaster is imminent. These creatures are very hard to locate, let alone capture on camera. Still, there are some researchers that focus solely on cryptids that are said to live underwater, making proof of their existence even harder to come by. There is the famous Loch Ness Monster that's been photographed and videoed many times, but its existence is still a topic of debate, since only sections of the beast are ever visible above the waterline, leading many people to believe that the photos are actually large logs drifting on the water, or other smaller animals. Similar creatures to the Loch Ness Monster have been spotted in lakes and rivers all over the world, but these are often dismissed as either being massive eels or a figment of someone's imagination. But there is one similar beast that's not well known or well researched as the Loch Ness Monster. It was discovered after it washed ashore in 1808 on the island of Stronsay in the Orkney Islands, and it's still considered by many researchers to be the first time that concrete proof was found for the existence of sea serpents. The strange creature washed ashore in the aftermath of a massive storm that hit the island, though many local inhabitants stated that they'd seen the beast swimming in the water before, and that it had been living in the area for a very long time. They described the creature as having an incredibly long body that was estimated to be at least 55 feet in length. It's also said to have 6 legs, an elongated, thin neck, and a mane that ran down its neck and part of its back. One witness stated that at the thickest part of its body, the serpent was as wide as a pony. Its head was said to resemble that of a seal, both in size and appearance. But one feature that's not often mentioned in sightings of other similar creatures is that the Stronsay beast had 2 blowholes, which would suggest that it had the ability to remain submerged beneath the water for a very long time. Many witnesses that spot these types of creatures report that they are truly snake-like, since they don't have any fins. But this is not the case with the Stronsay monster, which has been reported to have 6 fins, 3 on each side of its body. Locals flocked to the site where the creature washed ashore to get a closer look, and they immediately informed the authorities, but by the time that experts were sent to investigate, the creature's remains had decomposed so badly that it was impossible to tell what it actually was. However, researchers were able to send off the remains for testing, when they were analyzed by experts. But despite numerous tests being carried out, they were unable to determine what species the animal was, fueling theories that it was indeed a sea serpent that had never been studied before. Most people believe that this is possible since there are vast regions of our oceans that remain unexplored, and they could hold beasts far larger than we ever imagined. But not everyone is convinced that the Strangest beast was a newly discovered species. A surgeon by the name of Everard Holm managed to take some of the creature's remains back to England, where he performed a series of tests to determine what they were. He's convinced that they actually belong to a basking shark, a species of shark that often ventures close to Scotland's west coast. His findings have since been backed by many other researchers who have conducted their own studies, one of which was Dr. Swinney, an expert on reptiles, fish, amphibians, and vertebrates. But many people have refuted these claims, stating that the Strangest beast looks nothing like a basking shark, as they've seen it swimming in front of their own eyes. They point to the fact that the beast has 6 legs and a mane that runs down its back, something that certainly isn't present in a basking shark's anatomy. Added to this is the fact that the beast was estimated to be at least 55 feet long, while a basking shark typically reaches a length of around 20 to 25 feet, which is large for a shark, but too much of a difference for the two creatures to be confused with one another. It's a topic of debate that's set to continue for some time to come, since there isn't any definitive proof to conclude what the creature really was, and at present, all we have to go by is speculation and witness accounts. Many experts have stated that it's entirely possible for such a massive creature to live in these lakes and rivers, but if they do exist, they're experts at keeping out of sight, and it may be some time yet until we have a definitive answer, if we ever will. The ocean floor is littered with shipwrecks from all over the world, and from many different eras in our history. Although the physical remnants of these ships have been rusting at the bottom of the ocean, in some cases for centuries, there are some that have a paranormal element attached to them. One example is the Flying Dutchman ship that many people have reported seeing as it sails around the Cape of Good Hope near South Africa. Legend has it that the ship is doomed to sail the open seas for all eternity, and that it will never be able to dock again. Sailors who have seen the ship report that it glows with a ghostly light, and that it isn't seen until it's very close to a vessel. Sometimes the sightings are very brief, lasting only a few seconds, while others have reported that the ship's crew attempted to interact with them. On some occasions, the crew of the Flying Dutchman is said to try and communicate with other ships in order to get messages sent to land. But another legend holds that if a sailor was to receive such a message, they'll only live long enough to deliver before they inexplicably pass away. Others believe that when the Dutchman is spotted, it's best to keep it to yourself, since you'll only live long enough to relay the tale of your sighting. Some sailors believe that the ship will only appear to other vessels that are doomed to sink in the near future, and that it's best to dock as soon as possible before the prediction can come true. Another of these giant ships is known as the ghost ship, the Northumberland Strait. This vessel is said to have 3 masts, and it's thought to either be a schooner or a square rigger, and reports of sightings of this vessel are utterly terrifying. Witnesses who have seen the ship usually have similar stories, stating that the ship sails either north or northeast at an impossible speed. It's usually seen on a foggy night and seemingly appears out of nowhere, first appearing to be in no distress. But in the blink of an eye, the ship's rigging bursts into flames, and the crewmen can be seen running back and forth on the deck in a state of panic. In some instances, it's not just the rigging that catches fire, but the entire ship, and as quickly as it appeared out of thin air, it disappeared without explanation. On one occasion, the ship was spotted from the shore, and when it burst into flames, a group of local men decided to attempt a rescue operation. They boarded a small boat and rowed out to the ship as fast as they could, but long before they could get to it, it vanished as if it had never been there in the first place. But not all ships that are said to be cursed are seen sailing the 7 seas. A shipwreck named the Mica Wreck has been discovered on the seabed of the Gulf of Mexico, and it has many people convinced that a curse has been placed on it. The discovery was made in 2000 by ExxonMobil workers when they were in the middle of a drilling operation, and unbeknownst to them, their drill had passed right through the remnants of the ship. When they realized what had happened, they reported the incident to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, who immediately started an investigation. Pieces of wood that were recovered from the wreck showed signs that the ship had caught fire before it sank, and due to the wood being eastern white pine, it's believed that it was setting sail either to or from New Orleans when it went down beneath the waves. Researchers were determined to discover the name of the ship and those who were on board when it sank, but their efforts were constantly beset by strange occurrences, leading to the rumor that the wreck is cursed. The first effort was made in 2002, when a team was sent to map the area where the ship went down and to recover more artifacts from the site in hopes that they would contain some clues as to the ship's name, what time period it dates from, and what caused it to sink. They decided to first send down a small submersible with a camera attached to it, an operation that's regularly carried out at sites around the world with very little effort. However, that would not be the case this time. The submersible had only been in the water for around half an hour when it started to malfunction due to a problem with the hydraulic system in the docking station. But this wasn't the only problem. Whenever the vessel's thrusters were engaged, the images that were being recorded by the onboard camera would suddenly go dark without explanation. But the researchers remained dogged in their attempts and were eventually able to get the submersible down to the depth of the wreck. Just as they thought that they would be able to record some data, the sub's sonar suddenly stopped functioning, and try as they may, they could not get it to work again, despite multiple attempts at a reboot of the system. To make matters even worse, a case of miscommunication between the captain and another crewman caused the captain to jerk the submersible away from the wreck rather than navigate towards it. Another attempt was made to reach the wreck in 2000, but there would be more problems to come. Another attempt was made to reach the wreck in 2002, but there would be more problems to come. This time, the submersible was replaced by a robotic sub that would be easier to navigate, or so they thought. The very moment that the sub was placed in the water, its tether became entangled in its own propellers, and it started to veer off course at speed. This resulted in the sub crashing into the mothership, and it sank beneath the waves, never to be seen again. In the meantime, however, a submarine called the NR-1 had made it to the wreck where they were using a robotic arm to gather as many pieces of the ship as possible, and to map the area around the ship. But they soon realized that their efforts would be in vain, since the robotic arm was way too short to grab the pieces that they found. Instead, they focused on a single wooden post that seemingly contained identifying marks. The crew managed to grab the desired item and they made their way to the surface. But while doing so, the hydraulic system failed, causing the robotic arm to lose power, and the wooden post was dropped, also never to be found again. Later that year, another ship made an effort to collect pieces of the wreck from the ocean floor, but on their attempt, their propeller became entangled in debris, causing a delay. On their second attempt, the propeller itself malfunctioned, causing the ship to sit on the sidelines in order for the propeller to be repaired. During another attempt, the ship's prop shaft broke, causing the engine room to become flooded, nearly causing the ship to sink. Later attempts were more successful, but the identity of the cursed ship still remains a mystery today, as do the identities of its crew. It's very likely that the vast depths of our oceans hold the answers to many of the questions that we have about the creation of our planet and the origins of the materials that it's made up of. It may also hold some secrets to objects that are hurtling through space, as our planet is hit by asteroids 17,000 times each year on average, though most of these are reduced to very small particles as they travel through the atmosphere. There are, however, the occasional meteorite fragments that manage to stay intact, many of which end up at the bottom of the ocean. These could provide us with data on minerals that we've never seen before, and some people believe that they may even contain minute traces of extraterrestrial life. There have also been many reports by eyewitnesses who have seen strange-looking craft unlike anything they've seen on Earth, either diving into or rising up from the sea. This has led to speculation that there may be a secret undersea base that accommodates alien beings, and their ships or these crafts are actually constructed by governments of the world, and that they're being kept out of the public eye. But sometimes explorers of the ocean stumble upon something that seemingly shouldn't be there, as was the case in 2011, when a group of explorers found a strange disc-shaped object in the Baltic Sea that they couldn't identify, and it's now become known as the Baltic Sea Mystery Object. They described the disc as around 195 feet in diameter, with the same shape as a mushroom. The stem rises around 12 feet above the ground, and it's connected to the disc-shaped section, which contains strange square markings and straight edges that are unlikely to have been formed naturally. Strangely, the disc-shaped section seems to have undergone repairs, as it was noted that it contained cracks that had been filled with an unknown black substance. It's been the subject of many investigations, but to date, no one has been able to identify what the object is or how it came to be on the ocean floor. Many people believe that it's an alien craft that crash-landed in the ocean. This theory was further bolstered when platform-like structures were discovered leading to the craft from around 330 yards away, and the fact that researchers' electrical equipment would stop working as soon as they got within 220 yards of the strange object, which has still not been identified. But this isn't the only piece of alleged alien debris that was found at the bottom of the ocean. In 2014, witnesses described seeing an object thought to be a meteorite that's now known as IM-1 falling through the sky and crashing into the sea near Papua New Guinea. Soon after, a search was organized to try and locate the object, but without much success. But this didn't deter Avi Loeb, an astronomer from Harvard, to continue the search, and in June of 2023, he announced that he made an otherworldly discovery. At first, Loeb's team scoured the ocean floor with the use of a massive magnet, and they had some success finding volcanic ash, pieces of wire, and other metals as well as aluminum shavings. But then they stumbled across something that they still can't explain. Among some of the debris brought up from the seabed, they found microscopic spherical pieces of an unknown metal, and they decided to analyze the fragments in hopes that they could identify them. But they were surprised to learn that the metal is unlike any other found on Earth, not only in its makeup, but in its strength, as Loeb claims that it's stronger than any metal found on our planet, or any space rocks that have been tested in the past. Each of the metal fragments measures only around 1/100th of an inch in size, and the 50 samples that the team was able to collect weigh a mere 0.0012 ounces in total. Making this discovery even more intriguing is the fact that these strange globules have been found along the path that the falling object traveled, making it ever more likely that they originated from this object. Though it was originally assumed that the object was a meteor, further study of its trajectory and the speed at which it entered our atmosphere point to the possibility that it originated in a different solar system and traveled an unimaginable distance before crashing into Earth. And if this is true, they could teach us about areas of space that we may never have been able to study. But not everyone is convinced, since Loeb has a history of claims about alien spacecraft. In 2017, when the Oumuamua space rock was observed for the first time and found to have originated in a distant solar system, he suggested that it was a massive alien craft. This was, of course, proven to be incorrect, and hence many of his fellow researchers struggled to accept that these objects may be of alien origins. He also announced in 2021 that he had founded the Galileo Project, in which he hopes to construct a network of cameras around the world that will monitor the skies in search of unidentified flying objects, some of which he hopes will be proven to be of extraterrestrial origin. While the spherules that were found at the site are not unique, since they often appear at the site of meteor crashes, Loeb maintains that they're unlike any others, since they don't contain all of the metals that are usually found during investigations. He adds that the discovery could be the first in human history, if the objects are found to be from another solar system, as humans have never had the opportunity to study, let alone touch an object from that far away. At present, Loeb's expedition has come to an end, and what remains now is for the team to analyze the fragments that were found with the use of a spectrometer. This will provide them with further data on their isotopic composition. This data will then be submitted to a peer-reviewed journal, and no doubt, follow-up papers will be written, and only time will tell how this initial data is interpreted. If the spherules are indeed found to be interstellar in nature, Loeb's discovery will be regarded as historic, but there's no telling what we may learn from further analysis and hypotheses. It may be that the spherules really did come from a crashed alien spaceship, or it could be that they were simply deposited in the ocean by a meteorite that took thousands of years to reach its final destination in our oceans. Whatever the case may be, it's a very interesting discovery that'll keep the scientific community abuzz for some time to come. Normally, with broadcast interruptions, the most interesting part of the broadcast is what's doing the interrupting, rather than what's being interrupted. Some interruptions will target specific pieces of media, whether they're programs the individual doesn't agree with or stations as a whole that the interrupter wants to target. But normally, what's broadcast instead of the planned program is what gets the most attention. But when it comes to an interruption on a radio show dedicated to fringe theories and conspiracies, it's what was knocked off the air that's much more interesting. Not long before midnight on September 11, 1997, something extremely strange happened to a radio station broadcasting across the United States. Art Bell's Coast to Coast radio show had started in 1978 as West Coast AM. It originally focused on political topics and was a call-in show, but gradually began to focus more and more on the paranormal and conspiratorial. It was renamed Coast to Coast and was broadcast across hundreds of radio stations to millions of listeners. The late night hours, as well as being broadcast from the middle of the desert, gave it a special atmosphere for listeners who wanted to believe in the paranormal. The image of a radio host tackling topics like aliens from a trailer has gone on to appear countless times in pop culture. Art presented his show as a place where people could put forward their theories without being ridiculed, even if he didn't always believe those stories. One of the main draws of the show was the live call-ins. A number of lines with different themes would be set up that listeners could call into to tell their stories. These weren't screened ahead of time, and sometimes the only indication that Art had about what he was going to get was what line would be used. For the show that began in the late hours of September 11th, one of the main themes of the show was Area 51. A special phone line was set up for people who worked at or had previously worked at mysterious military sites. At this point, Area 51 hadn't been officially acknowledged by the government, but had been part of pop culture for decades. Even those not interested in the extraterrestrial or conspiracy theories have heard of the mysterious base. The origin of stories about UFOs likely began with the U-2 spy planes that were tested at the site in Nevada. Since then, the secrecy surrounding the site has gathered stories about aliens, either brought from the crash at Roswell or landing safely and living at the site. Unsurprisingly, the topic was a popular one among coast-to-coast listeners, and there were many callers who claimed to have knowledge about what went on at the site. Most of the callers didn't go into much detail and were obvious hoaxes, but an interesting call at 11 p.m. local time caught the attention of listeners and possibly something else. The call was only a few minutes long and was from a frantic man who sounded terrified. He started out by telling Art that he didn't have much time, as they would soon triangulate the call. The man went on to explain that he was a former employee at Area 51, and he'd been put on medical leave about a week earlier. Since then, he'd been running across the country, apparently because he was terrified of what he had seen. He claimed that what most people thought were aliens were actually extra-dimensional beings that had infiltrated the military and the government. He warned that there would be disasters in the near future, designed to wipe out most of humanity so that the rest of the world would be easier to control. There were safe places on the planet, but the people in charge were deciding not to move the population there, as they wanted this to happen. As the call went on, the man sounded more and more desperate and had difficulty talking. After claiming that the aliens, or extra-dimensional beings, wanted the major population centers wiped out, the line started to break up. Art could be heard saying "discharged," and then the entire show went off the air. Coast to Coast was actually off the air for half an hour, something Art apparently didn't realize. It was only when a network representative called to say something had happened that he realized. The show switched to a backup satellite and made it back to air, but the caller was gone. Art claimed he had no idea what had happened. Afterwards, listeners phoned in to describe strange things happening to the radio sets before the transmission had been lost, and there were claims that an EMP, or electromagnetic wave, had been used to try to wipe out the show. It's safe to say that some, if not all of the stories of strange activity with radios were just listeners wanting to add to the mystery. But what had actually happened was already mysterious enough. According to some sources, the call had actually lasted a few more minutes after the station was knocked off the air. The caller had continued with more of the same story before screaming and hanging up. This was never recorded, as at the time the show didn't record itself. It's only from listeners recording Coast to Coast that we have the clip of the mysterious Area 51 caller. The official explanation is that there was a problem with the satellite. The satellite had apparently lost its Earth lock. This wasn't common, but it wasn't exceptionally uncommon either. It may have had something to do with a significant solar flare that had happened the day before, which may have damaged the satellite. Interestingly, the Area 51 show was supposed to have taken place the previous day, but was postponed due to illness. It may have been a simple coincidence that a normal, if infrequent fault had occurred in the middle of a hoax, but for some, that coincidence is too much to believe. Whether the story was real or not, and what truly happens at Area 51 remains one of the most interesting and infamous mysteries. People living in Southampton in the 1870s already knew William Kintello as a relatively strange individual. He was popular, but could be a recluse at times, and would disappear into his workshop for days or even weeks at a time. But in late 1880, William would disappear for good, leaving behind a strange mystery made only stranger by a potential doppelganger. The Kintellos had been making weapons in the south of England for generations, and William would continue in the family business. He was born on the Isle of Wight around 1830 and later moved to Southampton. There, he worked as an inventor, sold oddities at his shop, and was the landlord of a local pub. The list of Kintello's actual inventions has been forgotten to history, but he seemed to have had some success. He would often go on business trips to the continent and would sometimes be away for months at a time. Kintello was relatively well liked in Southampton. He had a wife, 2 sons, and a daughter. His sons would go on to become engineers and would work with their father in his workshop in tunnels beneath the pub. A few people were lucky enough to see Kintello's workshop and described strange light machines, humming globes, and weapons they didn't recognize. But in the late 1870s, Kintello became more secretive about his inventions and began working on something even more mysterious. The 2 sons would sometimes be permitted to help in the workshop, but it was normally kept locked shut. Kintello would disappear for days or even weeks at a time, working on this invention that was apparently consuming his life. While the Kintellos didn't speak of the invention, it wouldn't be long before locals began to figure it out for themselves. Often at night, they would hear the sound of rapid firing coming from below ground, and it was widely believed that Kintello was working on some kind of mechanized weapon. Machine weapons had been around for a few decades at this point, and had been used in the American Civil War, but they were still very uncommon and needed refining. What exactly made Kintello's weapon different was a mystery, but this was obviously a project more important than anything he had worked on before. In late 1880, he announced he had finished his work. What happened next is still unclear. Some sources claim that Kintello's sons helped their father pack up his weapon so he could go on a business trip to try to sell it. Other stories say that Kintello said he was going on an extended vacation for 3 months. Some even suggest he went into the workshop, locked himself inside, and never came out. But it seems more likely that he had told his family he was going on a trip, either for business or leisure. 3 months passed and Kintello didn't return. This wasn't too alarming as he'd been away for extended periods of time before. But when 6 months had passed since his family last saw him, they started to get worried. A private investigator was hired to track down William Kintello. It was discovered that Kintello had withdrawn a large sum of money from his bank account, and a paper trail led to America, but after that, the case went cold. Meanwhile, in 1881, an American electrical engineer named Hiram Maxim arrived in London with a weapon to sell. Maxim claimed to be the son of a Maine farmer and had developed many machines while in the United States. They ranged from mouse traps to hair curlers to steam pumps. He even claimed to have invented the light bulb rather than Thomas Edison. At one point, he had visited Southampton. He had asked to see the work of an inventor named Philip Bannon, who had invented a type of propeller. Bannon told his daughter not to show Maxim his work, as Maxim had a reputation for brain-sucking. There's no record of Maxim and Kintello meeting, but when Kintello's sons saw a photo of the American inventor, they were sure they had seen him before. Maxim bore a striking resemblance to their father, and they believed Kintello had reappeared under a new name. The sons confronted Maxim at Waterloo train station. They went up to Maxim and called him father. Maxim responded, "Well, boys, what can I do for you?" before jumping on a train and leaving. Maxim refused to speak to the Kintello's family again. He did, however, address the claim that he was Kintello. He insisted he was born in America, but not the Isle of Wight. This was even more evidence for the Cantello family, as it wasn't well known that William had been born on the island. The family weren't the only people to mistake Maxim for William, though, as many people he met in England believed he was the Southampton inventor. His invention was also the same as the one created by Cantello, according to his sons. Maxim's weapon differed from previous machine weapons by using recoil energy to reload. When the sons were shown a photo of the weapon, they said it was the same as the one their father had worked on. He even called it the Maxim, as he was apparently fond of these sayings and would carry a small book of Maxims with him wherever he went. However, there was plenty of evidence that Maxim had been alive and inventing in America while Cantello was in England. He had even recently started to complain about a doppelganger pretending to be him in the United States. Some believe this isn't enough to determine that Cantello and Maxim were the same person. One of the many things that Maxim claimed to invent was a teleportation device. No evidence for such a device has ever been found, but if it were true, then it's possible Cantello was leading a double life on both sides of the Atlantic. This seems unlikely, but if Cantello and Maxim weren't the same person, whatever happened to this British inventor remains a mystery. It's often said that the Theodosian walls that surrounded Constantinople were a large reason why the city and the Byzantine Empire survived for so long. But it wasn't only defensive structures that protected the Eastern Romans. A much more mysterious defensive weapon had gained fame over the centuries, but how it was created remains a mystery. Greek fire was the name given to the weapon by the Crusaders, though the Byzantines themselves referred to it as sea fire or something similar. This secret weapon was able to defend the Eastern Roman Empire against its enemies for hundreds of years, and was impossible to replicate. The origin of Greek fire is almost as mysterious as the substance itself. It's believed to have been created by Kallinikos of Heliopolis, a Jewish architect from Syria who lived in the 7th century. This was as the Arab inventions were just beginning, and Kallinikos wanted something to protect his land from the newcomers. He fled to Constantinople and began experimenting with a wide range of substances before creating the weapon that made him famous. Later emperors would write that the recipe for Greek fire had actually been passed to Kallinikos through divine intervention. The angel that had given him the recipe warned that it was only to be used by Christians in the imperial city. Greek fire would prove to be the devastating weapon that Kallinikos had hoped it would be. It was successful in defending Constantinople during the First and Second Arab sieges, and was an important factor in many other battles won by the Byzantine army and navy. As the name would suggest, Greek fire was a fire-based weapon. A secret mixture of substances would be projected from a device called a siphon. These were effectively the first flamethrowers, and the Byzantines used them to great effect. They could be used to create a ring of fire around Constantinople that nobody was able to cross. It was also incredibly effective at sea. This weapon wasn't the first weapon that used fire to attack enemies, but normally fire-based weapons were useless at sea. Attacks would be cut short by the abundance of water, and attackers would have to resort to more traditional arms. But this is what made Greek fire stand out. The flames could not be put out by water, and some believed that water would actually make the flames grow even stronger. Greek fire meant the Byzantines could destroy ships from afar before their enemies were close enough to attack them. To make matters worse, the siphon would make a loud roaring sound when it was used. Those who weren't close enough to be caught by the weapon would still hear the roar and see the devastation that it had inflicted. Depictions of the weapon show it bursting from the mouths of metal dragons, and it's easy to imagine the weapon striking fear into the hearts of those that survived an encounter with it. Like any powerful weapon, it gave the Greeks the advantage, but only as long as they were the ones that had it. The recipe for Greek fire was a closely guarded secret. Some claim that only the Kallinikos family and the emperors themselves knew the recipe. It's likely there were a few more carriers of the secret than that, especially given how volatile the Eastern Roman Empire could be, and the secret would have been passed from one dynasty to another, suggesting the emperor wasn't the sole keeper of the secret. But it was true that there were only a limited number of people that knew how to create Greek fire, which may be the reason why that secret is no longer known today. When exactly Greek fire disappeared is still being debated, but it seems to have vanished from the battlefield around the same time as the Fourth Crusade, an event which crippled the Byzantines and temporarily removed the empire from Constantinople. Given the amount of disruption that took place, it's not surprising that the secret was forgotten. Many tried to recreate Greek fire. Some had some success, but none could match the qualities that were produced by the Byzantine product. Even today, modern scientists haven't been able to recreate the substance. We have a few clues about what it may have been. As well as the qualities of Greek fire, we also know that a mixture of sand and vinegar could be used to put it out. Given the fact that only water seemed to increase the flames, many believe that quicklime was used in some way. Quicklime is an especially volatile substance that combusts on contact with water. Others believe that petroleum and sulfur were used, as well as a variety of other substances. One of the only Greek records we have that went some way to disclose the secret came from a Byzantine princess and historian. She wrote that an inflammable resin was collected from pine and other evergreen trees. This was rubbed with sulfur and put into tubes. Soldiers would blow on the tubes, forcing the substance to meet a flame at the end, which would then ignite the substance. While tree resin and sulfur may have been used in Greek fire, there are definitely more ingredients we still don't know about. Historians and archaeologists have been able to piece together more information about how Greek fire was used, including the discovery of balls that would have been coated in the substance and thrown at enemies. But today, the substance remains as much of a mystery to us as it did to the ancient enemies of the Eastern Roman Empire, and one that continues to fascinate anybody with an interest in history or historical warfare. The disappearance of El Fausto is one of the most puzzling maritime mysteries, and one not many people have heard of. Compared to the likes of the Mary Celeste, it hasn't received as much attention, but the fate of the ship and its 4-man crew is far more mysterious. El Fausto was a fishing vessel that sailed between the Canary Islands in the 1960s. It was owned by a man named Rafael Acosta, and normally sailed by 4 men, brothers Ramon and Eliberto Hernandez, and their cousins Miguel and Viterbo Acosta. While the ship was designed for fishing, it was relatively large. It was 14 meters in length and had space for 20 tons of cargo. That meant it was often used to ship fruit, diesel, and other goods between the islands. On July 20th, it was performing such a duty, transporting agricultural supplies to El Hierro Island, the westernmost of the islands. On that day, Viterbo wasn't present, as he had other duties during a festival on one of the other islands. Instead, Ramon, Eliber, and Miguel completed the job. It was a journey they'd done countless times before without issue, and this time was no different. As the men were unloading the cargo, they were approached by 27-year-old Julio Garcia. Julio was a father of 2 from Tazacorte and La Palma, the same town the men were from. His wife and children were still there while he worked as an irrigation engineer in El Hierro. Earlier that day, he had received a message from his wife saying his baby daughter was sick and he needed to get back to see her. He'd missed the liner that traveled between the islands, and the next one wouldn't depart until 2 days later. Julio asked the crew of El Fausto if he could ride with them. They agreed and refused any payment for the journey. At 2:30 a.m. on July 21st, El Fausto left El Hierro, headed north to La Palma. La Palma is the closest island to El Fausto, and the journey should have taken between 7 and 8 hours. The trip was one the 3 sailors regularly had done countless times before, and everyone that knew them was confident in their ability to navigate the waters between the 2 islands. La Palma is particularly mountainous and easily visible from the sea. Even though a light fog on the day of their disappearance may have made it harder to navigate, there were also 2 lighthouses that would have helped to guide the way. Other than the mist, the weather conditions were perfect for traveling by sea that morning. There was no wind, which wasn't a problem as El Fausto was motor-powered and capable of going up to 7 knots. The sea was calm, and the sailors had dealt with much worse conditions than those they faced that day. The boat was due to arrive at 10 a.m., but it never arrived. It didn't take long for the boat's owner to try to find out what had happened. He didn't think that the sailors would have gotten lost given their experience, and figured that some mechanical fault must have been behind the disappearance. He sent another boat to make the journey between La Palma and El Hierro, thinking that it would come across the stranded El Fausto at some point. When journeys between the 2 islands turned up no sign of the boat, it became clear that something very strange had happened. The boat was reported missing, and search and rescue teams were sent out to locate the 4 men. Despite numerous ships and planes taking part in the search, there was no sign of El Fausto or what may have happened to it. 3 days passed before anybody received any clues as to what had happened. The news came from a British ship that was heading towards the Netherlands from South America. While roughly 120 miles west of La Palma, they had come across a much smaller vessel out in the open water. It was the El Fausto. Even more miraculously, all 4 of the men were still seen on board. The British sailors described the missing men as being dehydrated, hungry, and sunburned, but they were otherwise well. They were also apparently not in a bad mental state and didn't seem to be typical castaways. The British offered to tow the men home, but they refused. They instead just asked for supplies so that they could make it home themselves. Apparently, nobody asked why they preferred this, but the supplies were given to the 4 men, and they left. When news got back to the men's families on La Palma, they were confident the group would be home soon. It would take a while for them to get home, but the boat was expected to arrive at port that evening. Just like 4 days earlier, the boat never arrived. Another search was sent out, this time with the search area shifted to the center on the spot where the British ship had spotted El Fausto. Military planes were even utilized in the search, which became the most expensive in the history of the Canary Islands. About 2 weeks of searching the Atlantic Ocean took place, but no sign of the boat was found. It wasn't simply a case of the boat being missing. No debris or oil slicks, which might have been a clue for investigators, ever surfaced. It was as if the boat and the men on board had vanished into thin air. The search was called off on August 7th, and the men were deemed lost at sea. The fate of El Fausto and the 4 men remained a mystery for months, until finally, in October of that year, there was some progression in the case. An Italian ship was on its way to Venezuela when it came across El Fausto. It was located near the Tropic of Cancer and was more than 1,000 kilometers from the Canary Islands. It also appeared to be abandoned, though the crew of the Anna could find no reason why. The small boat seemed to be in good condition and there was no sign of any damage. 2 of the sailors went aboard the abandoned boat to investigate. There was nothing unusual above deck, but in the boiler room they found a disturbing sight. The partially mummified remains of one of the sailors were found on the floor, still clutching the radio. The room was filled with paperwork and a small notebook was found nearby. The men were understandably creeped out by the sight, but decided to tow El Fausto to Venezuela. They took some of the documents and the notebook with them as they went on to the Anna, but as all the writing was in Spanish, they didn't know what any of it said. As they approached Venezuela, the line connecting the 2 ships broke, and El Fausto began to sink first. Before too long, the entire boat had vanished beneath the water. The notebook belonged to Julio, and it's believed that he was also the man who'd been found below deck. Most of the pages had been ripped out, but the final page was to be a letter to his wife. It was obvious he knew he wasn't going to live, and he was giving her instructions about how to sell his property so that she had money to survive on. The final line read, "Don't ever tell our son all this happened to me. You know that God wanted this fate for me. Love you." The puzzling mystery has remained without answers for decades. There's never been any answer as to what happened to the other 3 men, all of which would have been more experienced sailors. Julio was found near the radio, but apparently nobody had heard any calls for help. The boat itself appeared undamaged, but a proper investigation never took place. Theories about what happened to the men ranged from them stumbling across something they shouldn't have, being involved in illegal activity, or a series of unrelated events that began with faulty navigation equipment and eventually cost them all their lives. Unless anyone else saw what happened and comes forward all these decades later, it's likely this will forever remain a mystery. The strange case of Ray Rivera came back into the public eye after it appeared on the TV show Unsolved Mysteries. Despite many theories from amateur and professional investigators, many believe that the final day in this young man's life remains a mystery. Ray was 32 years old when he passed away under extremely strange circumstances. He was a writer and videographer who worked freelance for various companies under the Agora umbrella. He was also a water polo coach and had played professionally when he was younger. Ray and his partner Allison moved to Baltimore in 2004, after he was offered a job by a friend to write for a finance newsletter, which was also under the Agora umbrella. Over the next year, the couple settled down in the new city, made friends, and joined a church. Even though they hadn't been in Baltimore for very long, they had made roots in the city. But in November and December of 2005, things began to change for Ray. He married Allison that November. Sadly, not long after that, another one of Ray's friends named Tom Hickling passed away while visiting his daughter in Angola. The passing was the result of a car accident, but Ray seemed to believe something else had happened. He also quit his job at the finance newsletter and began working freelance. Despite the recent tragedy and the big changes, there didn't seem to be anything too unusual going on in Ray's life. He and Allison were planning on moving back to Los Angeles, and he was writing screenplays, something he was very passionate about, even though it didn't earn him much money. But there were some signs that things were a bit off for Ray. He seemed to be a bit more paranoid than normal and would insist on going everywhere with his wife. She believed he was protecting her from something but wouldn't tell her what. He also wouldn't tell her why he was suspicious about Tom Hickling's passing. At 1 a.m. on May 15th, the security alarm at Rivera's home was triggered. Ray seemed very scared by this, and Allison found him looking around the house with a baseball bat. He wasn't typically a fearful person, but apparently he was terrified by the possibility of an intruder. The police arrived and concluded that a squirrel had probably set off the alarm. The following day at 1 a.m., the exact same thing happened. This time, Allison noticed one of the windows in the living room looked as if it had been tampered with from the outside. But again, police believe the alarm was set off by a squirrel. May 16, 2006 was the last time anybody would see Ray alive. Allison had to go away on a business trip and would be away for a few days. While Ray was home alone, he worked on editing some projects he was working on and made a call to a local Freemasons lodge. He was inquiring about joining the lodge, though some friends believe he was doing research for another project. At some point, Allison's work colleague, Claudia, arrived as she had arranged to stay the night. At 6 p.m., Claudia heard Ray take a call in his office, which was next door to the guest room. She didn't hear anything that was being said other than when Ray suddenly shouted before running out of the house. He took Allison's SUV and drove away, then returned, went into the house for a moment, and left again. The call was later traced to an Angora switchboard, but who Ray spoke to remains a mystery. Ray didn't return home that night, and he didn't answer any calls. The following day, when Ray still hadn't been heard from, Allison ended her work trip early and returned home. Ray was reported missing, and the police began their investigation. Ray's family and friends joined the search for him but found no clues about where he might have gone that night. Ray's friend, Porter Stansberry, who ran the finance newsletter, even offered a reward for information. On May 22nd, Allison's parents found the SUV in a parking lot attached to the Belvedere Hotel. While still called a hotel, the Belvedere is now home mostly to retail lots and private residences. An extension of the first and second floors connects the main building to the parking lot. The following day, some of Ray's friends went to the top of the parking lot to try to get an aerial view of the area. That was when they spotted a small hole in the roof of the Belvedere extension. Scattered around the hole were a number of items, including a phone, glasses, and flip-flops. They all belonged to Ray. The hole was found to be above a disused conference room in the Belvedere. When police went to the room, they found Ray's body beneath the hole. He had apparently been there the entire time he had been missing, and the staff in the building reported a strange smell coming from the room from the 19th and onwards. Police concluded that Ray had taken his own life after jumping from the main building, but the official cause of his passing is still ruled unknown, and there are many that do not believe this series of events. The distance from the edge of the main building to the hole in the extension roof would have required Ray to be running at about 11 miles per hour. That wouldn't normally be impossible, especially given that Ray was athletic, but he would have been running in flip-flops or barefoot, and there wouldn't have been much of a run-up for him. People have also claimed that his wounds don't line up with a fall, as they appear to be mostly on one side. It looks more like the wounds sustained from a car accident than a fall from 14 stories. The hole in the roof was also almost too small for Ray to have fit through, and looked more like someone had accidentally put a foot through while walking on the roof than fallen from a great height. His phone and glasses were also undamaged, leaving more questions. Investigators did find a strange note at Ray's home. It was cut into 3 pieces and stored in plastic and taped to the back of the family's computer. It doesn't make much sense, and in parts seems like a stream of consciousness. It uses phrases associated with Freemasonry, such as "whom virtue unites, death cannot separate," and lists the names of celebrities and people in Ray's life. Some believe this is a sign of Ray's deteriorating mental health, and some have even claimed he had undiagnosed schizophrenia. Others believe it was simply notes for a screenplay that Ray had been working on, though why he would have hidden it like this remains a mystery. Ray's family insists that he showed no signs of any mental health problems, or wanting to end his own life, pointing to plans that he had for the near future. Of course, it's always possible for someone suffering to hide it from their loved ones. There also isn't any clear reason why someone would want to take Ray's life. He had no known enemies, and there doesn't seem to be anybody with a motive to not only take his life, but to do so in such a strange manner. For many, the case of Ray Rivera remains a mystery, with far more questions than answers. 19-year-old Elizabeth Iris Prescott was described as a sweet and good-natured young woman. Shortly after graduation, Elizabeth married and began to plan her new life with her new husband. Elizabeth's marriage had taken her family by surprise, but they were happy for her nonetheless. They were happy if she was happy, and everything for Elizabeth seemed to be going well. She was in the process of deciding between work and college, and 2004 was shaping up to be a remarkable year. That was until April of 2004, when Elizabeth disappeared from her new home without a trace. Born on October 5, 1984, Elizabeth was raised by her father, Vincent, and her mother, Donna, in Panama City, Florida. As Elizabeth grew, she took to the nickname Beth, which stuck for the rest of her life. She was described as a kind and caring young woman who would help anyone in need. Her father, Vincent, commented that while his daughter showed extreme kindness, she also showed naivety. He told the Panama City Herald that if offered a ride, Beth was the kind of person who would accept it. In 2003, Beth proudly walked across the stage outside of Rutherford High School, signaling the closure of a significant chapter in her life. 2003 was to be more an eventful year for Beth. Sometime in 2003, her boyfriend at the time, Eric Moore, proposed to her. The engagement lasted for a few months before Beth decided to break things off in December of 2003. While Eric was devastated, the split was said to have been peaceful. In February of 2004, Beth stunned her family when she revealed she was getting married, but not to Eric. Beth and 23-year-old Coy Prescott had enjoyed a whirlwind romance, and by February of 2004, Coy had gotten down on one knee and popped the question. It's yet to be determined exactly when the relationship between Coy and Beth started. Later that month, Beth walked down the aisle and into the arms of her new husband. The pair moved to the Callaway Apartments in the 500 block of North Tyndall Parkway in Panama City, Florida, to usher in their new marriage. Amenities such as supermarkets and pharmacies were just a stone's throw away, and it was close enough for the pair to get to work. For 2 months, the couple lived in wedded bliss. Coy would return home each evening to his wife, and the pair would make dinner and watch TV. Everything for the Prescotts seemed perfect. That was until the end of 2004. April 30th of 2004 should have been a joyous occasion for the newlyweds. April 30th was Coy's birthday, and the pair had spent the previous evening trawling the aisles of Walmart to get ingredients for a birthday dinner. Early that morning, Coy's alarm beeped loudly, and he collected his birthday wishes from his wife. He got ready as standard, and by 5:45, he was out the door. Coy told Beth he would call her later that day to finalize their plans for the evening, but Beth never answered the call. Coy left a message on the answering machine and hoped to hear from his wife later. At around 4 p.m., Coy returned from work to find an empty house. He called out to Beth, but there was no answer. She had not left a note or clue where she would be. While moving through the apartment, Coy found a wet towel hanging in the bathroom and noticed that $50 was missing. Coy would later confirm that he left not one but 2 voicemails on the home phone that morning. Sources differ, with some stating the first message had been picked up by Beth, with others saying neither message had been picked up. Coy spent the remainder of his birthday alone, wondering what had happened to his wife. The following morning, when Beth still hadn't returned home, Vincent and Donna received a call from a panicked Coy. The trio agreed to report her missing, and a call was placed to the Bay County Sheriff's Office. The Bay Sheriff's Office arrived at the apartment in due time and began their search for Beth. There was no sign of forced entry into the apartment, and nothing besides $50 appeared to be missing. Donna and Vincent told the police Beth had run away before, but all her clothes and belongings were still inside. If Beth would have disappeared of her own accord, she would have tapped into what the News Herald called the large sums of money accessible to her. Coy Prescott immediately became suspect number 1. Coy maintained that he'd been at work all day, using the phone calls as proof. To this day, Coy has never been officially ruled out as a suspect in Beth's disappearance. Naturally, the next suspect was her ex-boyfriend Eric Moore, with whom she'd broken off an engagement less than 5 months earlier. Eric was cooperative with the police and voluntarily submitted to a polygraph test. He also told investigators that he and Beth had continued their relationship long after their engagement had been called off. Beth had continued to see Eric, despite being married to Coy. Investigators were now posed with several possibilities. Had Eric taken action after feeling slighted by Beth? Or had Coy discovered their secret affair and taken action himself? Through the use of meticulously kept records, investigators discovered a vital clue. On April 30th, Beth had met with Eric to return her engagement ring. While Eric has never fully been cleared as a suspect, investigators believe this detail is merely coincidental. When Beth had run away in the past, she had always contacted someone in the family, but this time was different. The Bay County Sheriff's Office brought in a canine unit to aid in their search, but the dogs couldn't find anything useful. Ponds close to the Callaway apartments where Beth had resided were dragged and searched, but to this day, not a single shred of evidence has ever been found. Unfortunately, the possibility of finding physical evidence in and around the Callaway apartments is 1,000,000,000 to 1. In 2018, the apartments and much of the area were destroyed by Hurricane Michael, which caused over $25 billion in damages. Weeks after Beth disappeared, the search petered out, and media interest waned. Years later, Beth's case made the news once again, when the Bay County Sheriff's Office announced they'd uncovered a new suspect in her case, career criminal Ivan Ferrer Perdomo. While imprisoned on unrelated charges, Ivan had bragged to fellow inmates that he had taken Beth's life that April afternoon. According to Ivan, Beth arrived at his 23rd Street home looking to buy substances. He gave no motivation for the crime and has since refused to cooperate. There's no hard evidence linking Ivan to Beth's disappearance. Anyone with information is asked to contact Lieutenant Jeremy Mathis of the Bay County Sheriff's Office at 850-747-4700, quoting case number 2004-055-241. 19-year-old Melissa Witt was described as kind and warm by those who knew her best. The young woman was slowly beginning to find her place in the world, and life for Melissa was going well. She was deep into her studies at college and held a job on the side. Everything in Melissa's life seemed to be coming together, and she was beginning to think about her career after graduation. Just 3 weeks shy of Christmas of 1994, Melissa would disappear, tearing a hole in her family. It would take her family weeks to get answers, but some questions remained unanswered even then. Born March 9th of 1975 to Mary Ann Witt in Arkansas, Melissa adopted the nickname Missy as a young girl. Throughout her life, the nickname stuck, and most around town knew her as Missy. Missy was bright, popular, and most of all, serious about her education. In 1993, Missy graduated from high school and immediately began thinking of her future. She settled on Westart Community College in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and was accepted with haste due to her position as an honors student. Studying wasn't enough for Missy. She craved more opportunities. Shortly after enrolling at community college, she worked part-time as a dental assistant. She hoped to gain real-world experience and considered this a career path once she'd finished college. All was going well for Missy. She was achieving good grades and was progressing well as a dental assistant. She was well liked by those that she worked with and had a good reputation with her professors. December 1st, 1994, the buzz of excitement filled the air of Fort Smith, Arkansas, and the Witt household was no exception. Missy and her mother, Mary Ann, had been exceptionally close all of their lives, and throughout contemporary news articles, there's only ever mention of her mother. Missy and Mary Ann spent the morning together, laying out their plans for the day. Before leaving to attend class, Missy asked her mother if she could borrow some money, to which Mary Ann said no. This triggered an argument between the otherwise close mother-daughter duo. Missy left in a huff, jumping in her 1995 Mitsubishi Mirage and driving off. After reflecting on the incident, Mary Ann felt terrible and left a note for Missy, telling her to meet at the local bowling alley later that night, where she would buy her daughter a burger. Mary Ann left her Fort Smith home, not knowing this would be the last time she would ever see her daughter alive. Later that afternoon, Missy left class and headed to her job as a dental assistant, finishing at around 5 p.m. To add to Missy's bad mood, she discovered that her car wouldn't start, something her mother and investigators had flagged as the first sign of trouble. According to reports, a good Samaritan helped Missy jumpstart her car, and by around 5:45 p.m., she returned home. She's presumed to have changed clothes, looked at her mother's note, and set off towards the bowling alley. Marianne awaited patiently inside Bowling World for her daughter, but as the hours ticked away, she felt something was off. She presumed Missy had seen the note and continued to wait for her daughter. At 7:45 p.m., a man in the parking lot of the bowling alley found Missy's car keys on the ground, covered in red specks. It appears the man did not see or ignored the red specks on the keys and handed them to the front desk of the bowling alley. After waiting for her daughter for several hours, Marianne headed home, filled with anger and concern. A restless night lay ahead for Marianne as Missy had also failed to show up at their home. Later that morning, Marianne reported to the Fort Smith Police Department, and the search for Missy began. An examination of the college's campus and Missy's workplace were undertaken, but nobody had seen her after she left the previous evening at around 5 p.m. Missy's disappearance quickly spread amongst the Fort Smith community, and days after she was last seen, the first of many clues were discovered. Missy's 1995 Mitsubishi Mirage was found near the bowling alley. By the side of her car, investigators found a gold hoop earring, a crushed hair clip, and a streak of red that ended abruptly. Investigators postulated that while Missy had fought with her attacker, they had quickly subdued her by hitting her in the head. The evidence found at the scene deeply disturbed investigators and Marianne, and hope for Missy quickly faded. Christmas of 1994 came and went without Missy, leaving a large hole in her family. Everyone in Fort Smith banded together to help Missy's family and the Fort Smith Police Department. Supermarkets placed up posters and signs with local businesses following suit. The Fort Smith police knew Missy had been abducted, most likely by a stranger prowling the bowling alley's car park for a victim. Several witnesses came forward, claiming to have heard a woman shouting for help the night that Missy disappeared. But when they reached the parking lot, the woman was gone. January of 1995 would usher in a crushing blow for the Witts. On January 13th, two trappers looking for deer near Turner Bend in the Ozark National Forest found Missy's body. She was lying face down near a pile of stones. Forensic investigators believe animal activity had moved her body from its final resting place and much of it had decomposed. A few short hours later, the body was confirmed as belonging to Missy. While Missy's body had been found, investigators still had burning questions. Outrage filled the city of Fort Smith. Who could kidnap a 19-year-old college student and dump her over 50 miles away? Despite the outrage, Missy's case quickly went cold, as there were few leads and clues to work with. Investigators began to consider the possibility that someone had manufactured Missy's battery problems. Had they been following her all evening, waiting for the perfect time to strike? And if so, who were they? In 1998, the Fort Smith police perked up when they heard the case of Melissa Trotter. Melissa's life had been taken in December of 1998 in Conroe, Texas, by Larry Swearingen. Like Missy, Melissa was 19 years old and had been kidnapped from a parking lot before being dumped in a national forest 50 miles away. The coincidences were too stark for investigators to ignore, and he seemed to be the perfect suspect. Everything in the two cases aligned perfectly, but Swearingen professed his innocence. Larry Swearingen met his end via lethal injection in 2019, maintaining his innocence until the end. LaDonna Humphrey, author and private investigator, who grew up close to Fort Smith and shared mutual friends with Missy, had taken a keen interest in her case. LaDonna has written 2 books and produced a documentary about Missy's case, and she's confident the police are close to getting this case solved. Anyone with information on Missy's case is asked to contact the dedicated hotline at 800-440-1992. 63-year-old Pauline Diaz was described as a gentle and loving woman. Pauline was a devoted mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother who was willing to do anything for her family. Her generous heart extended beyond her family too, and in every role she worked, Pauline radiated love. Just a few short years from retirement, Pauline was saving up so she could spoil not only herself but her family in her golden years. Unfortunately, Pauline's family were robbed of these years when she disappeared one December afternoon. Pauline Diaz had carved out a wonderful life for herself in San Antonio, Texas. She'd been working at the H-E-B supermarket for several years by 2010 and had risen through the ranks. Starting as a greeter, she eventually moved to the bakery, where she would sneak warm tortillas to passing children. By all accounts, Pauline's life was perfect, but there was one thing bothering her. By 2010, the relationship between her and her husband, Pedro Ruiz, was growing frosty. Pauline had asked for divorce, but according to her daughter, Juanita, Pedro refused. She told Fox 26 Houston that not only had Pedro refused the divorce, but that his violent and aggressive behavior had escalated. After being denied a divorce, Pauline moved out of the home, but this didn't deter Pedro. He began calling her multiple times a day and took to stalking her. On several occasions, he had to be physically removed from the supermarket where Pauline worked, as he tried to speak to her and intimidate her. Juanita alleges Pedro followed her mother everywhere she went and even took to calling Pauline's children. Pauline didn't waver in her decision and continued to push for divorce. This bizarre behavior came to a head on December 7, 2010. December 7th was set to be an ordinary day for Pauline. She donned her distinctive HEB uniform and left for work bright and early. At around 2 p.m., Pauline clocked out and headed out of the store, located off of Southeast Military Drive and Goliad Road. CCTV footage captured Pauline talking to an unknown woman as she got into her white Toyota Tacoma. This was the last confirmed sighting of Pauline. When she failed to make contact with her family, they reported her missing to the police. Given Ruiz's behavior in the lead up to her disappearance, investigators mobilized immediately. Hours later, investigators uncovered the CCTV footage showing Pauline's last moments, and they were desperate to talk to the woman in the footage. A group of investigators were dispatched to interview Pauline's friends and family, and that's when Pedro Ruiz made his statement. According to Ruiz, he saw Pauline shortly after she left for work on December 7th. She had stopped by to borrow a lawnmower. The two shared minimal conversation and then Pauline went on her way. The investigation into Pauline's disappearance continued throughout the night of December 7th, and the following day, investigators made a vital discovery. On the intersection of Highway 181 and FM 320, investigators found Pauline's abandoned white Toyota Tacoma. The place where her car was found was down the street from Pedro Ruiz's home. Pedro insisted nothing untoward occurred during their meeting, and no evidence has been able to prove otherwise. Juanita claims that in the wake of her mother's disappearance, Pedro's behavior drastically changed. Before her mother's disappearance, Pedro would call everyone Pauline knew and follow her everywhere. But after Pauline disappeared, he suddenly stopped calling and even changed his number so that they couldn't reach him. Pedro's family has also closed themselves off. Police believe Pauline made it home as her phone and work shoes were found inside. According to KSAT, the shoes were covered in the same sand found at Pedro's home. On December 7th, Pauline had clocked out in a hurry and was rushing to be somewhere. Clothes found in the entryway to her home were strewn around, a stark contrast to the organized and orderly mother that Juanita knows. The investigators grew colder and colder, and the hopes of finding Pauline began to fade to black. Pauline's children hired a private investigator and took on the roles of sleuths themselves. In 2018, they found the woman their mother was seen talking with on the day she disappeared. But according to Fox 26, the woman offered nothing viable. Also in that year, the Wilson County Sheriff's Office dug on the property of Pedro. According to reports, only a pig skull was found. In 2021, the Sheriff's Office announced that they were excavating an area in relation to Pauline's disappearance. They later revealed they'd received a tip from a woman who claimed to have seen a fresh mound of dirt that they believed to be a shallow grave. A dig took place off of the 14,400 block of Old Corpus Christi Road and included the use of drones, but nothing was found. Investigators haven't given up on Pauline's case, and her family continues their investigation. Each year on Pauline's birthday, her family gathers to remember her and bring awareness to her case. Anyone with information is asked to contact John Deegan of the Wilson County Sheriff's Department at 830-393-2535 or San Antonio Crime Stoppers at 210-224-7867. 29-year-old Janet Shearer of Kokomo, Indiana, was described as a bright and vibrant young woman. Those who knew her best described her as a firecracker who wasn't hesitant to say what was on her mind. Janet's frankness and zest for life lent well to her job as a special education teacher. Life for Janet seemed perfect. She was doing well in her new role, and her social life was blossoming. The bright future that lay ahead of Janet would be cruelly snatched away one May evening in 1980. Born March 10th of 1951 to parents Richard and Rose Shearer in Kokomo, Indiana, little else is known about Janet's life besides her birth. Sometime during her childhood, her parents divorced, with both of them remarrying, and Janet getting a stepmother and stepfather. In 1969, she graduated from Oak Hill High School and enrolled at Indiana University. By 1973, Janet had completed her undergraduate studies in political science and psychology. And between 1976 and 77, she embarked on her postgraduate education. By 1980, Janet had completed her postgrad certification and was working at Bon Air Middle School in Kokomo as a special education teacher, teaching children aged 12 to 15. Janet has also worked at the Regional Mental Health Center and several schools throughout her academic career, which gave her great insight. Friends said Janet often canceled plans to prepare lessons for her students and was deeply devoted to her job. With the school year coming to a close in May of 1980, Janet was coming to the end of her first year as a teacher at Bon Air Middle School, and the school's principal couldn't wait to see what she had in mind for the upcoming terms. On May 23, 1980, Janet taught her students as usual, with nobody knowing it would be the last time they would ever see her. At around 4:30 p.m., Janet left work, declining a social outing with some other teachers as she was preparing for her new nephew's birthday party. Over that weekend, Janet was also due to attend her family's traditional Memorial Day barbecue. That evening, Janet arrived at her apartment, number 11, in the center of Meadow Apartments, located at 3615 South Hardebeck Road, parking her orange Datsun B210 outside. According to reports, the complex was rather run down and had experienced several issues with robberies and break-ins over the years. Janet lived on the ground floor, and the parking lot and areas around the apartments were not very well lit. Memorial Day came and went, and Janet was a no-show at the barbecue. Her family believed she may have gotten ill and hoped to see her for her nephew's birthday party the following day. Sunday, May 25th came, but still, Janet was nowhere to be found. Aside from being devoted to her students, Janet was also devoted to her family, and it was out of character for her to miss an event. On the evening of Sunday, May 25th, 1980, Janet's mother, Rose, and her stepfather headed over to her apartment to check on her as she was not answering her phone. The apartment was locked when the pair arrived, so they waited for a friend to get the key. When they walked inside, a foul stench filled the air. Rose moved around the apartment looking for any clues as to where her daughter was. She first checked the bedroom but saw nothing. Then she moved towards the bathroom, slowly moving her light. As the light flickered, Rose was met with a scene that no parent should have to see. Janet was lying face down on the bathroom floor, nude. Investigators would later comment on the manner in which Janet's body had been found. They say she was lying perfectly face down, and her face was not on one side as one would imagine. It appears whoever did this had staged her body as her arms were perfectly straight and her palms were up. In a complete state of shock, Rose motioned to her husband, who in turn ran to the nearest phone to call the Kokomo police. Police quickly arrived at the scene and found several disturbing clues. The lights of Janet's apartment had not been working, hence why Rose and the other two men were using lights. Janet's phone had been moved from its usual spot, which made it inaccessible from the bathroom and bedroom. Janet's body was littered with puncture wounds, and the blade used to carry out the attack was placed neatly beside her. Her attacker had cleaned the blade before staging it with her body. More importantly, the weapon used belonged to Janet, showing a lack of premeditation on her attacker's part. Investigators found substantial evidence to suggest that Janet was attacked in her bedroom before she was able to move to the bathroom. Her attacker went to great lengths to subdue her, and the apartment was in a state of disarray. The coroner determined Janet had perished anywhere from 20 to 28 hours prior to her 11 p.m. discovery by her parents. Neighbors in the apartment complex were interviewed, and one neighbor claimed to have heard something. This neighbor reported hearing a woman scream, along with the sound of a car screeching out of the parking lot at around 3:30 a.m. This neighbor didn't investigate the noise or call the police. What puzzled investigators was the lack of forced entry to Janet's apartment. When Rose and her husband arrived, the door had been locked. Janet's Datsun remained in the parking lot, and nothing from her apartment had been taken. She'd not suffered any physical assault, leaving the police motiveless. Was Janet attacked by someone that she knew and trusted? And was it a spur-of-the-moment attack, or did her attacker purposefully not bring their own weapon? Only one potential suspect has materialized throughout the case, a female friend of Janet's. The suspect has never been named, and investigators have never had enough evidence to proceed with a conviction. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Howard County Sheriff's Department at 765-456-2020. 22-year-old Laura Marie Nimbach was a fiercely independent young woman who was determined to finish her nursing degree in the late 2000s. Laura's life hadn't always been easy, and her life had taken a turbulent turn in recent years. Despite the adversities and setbacks, Laura was powering her way through, working on herself daily. In early 2009, the potentially bright future that lay ahead of Laura disappeared when she herself vanished. Laura's independent streak started at an early age when she took a job as a nanny to pay for her tuition at a private Catholic school in Livonia, Michigan. She lived with her father, who's said to have had gambling issues, and there was never enough money to go around. Laura worked tirelessly at school and as a nanny to make her dreams come true. In 2004, when Laura opened her results envelope, she cheered joyfully. She had done it. She had obtained excellent grades and was able to enroll at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan, just 20 miles from home. That autumn, Laura began training to become a nurse, but just 2 years into her degree, she began to have second thoughts. Those second thoughts culminated in her dropping out entirely in 2006. Around this time, Laura had also escaped an abusive relationship and was looking to leave Michigan altogether. She set her sights on the Sunshine State and never looked back. In Clearwater, Florida, Laura lived with her friend Amanda Botts, who had also moved from Michigan. While Amanda returned to Michigan months later, Laura decided to stay and flourished in her new environment. She found herself a steady job and was making a good income. When her family visited her, they saw how happy she was, and she'd returned to the Laura that they knew. But these times were not to last. Months after she moved, Laura began a relationship with Sean Wheeler. Very quickly into the relationship, Sean showed his true colors and began physically abusing her. Laura's luck in the Sunshine State was slowly running out, and in 2007, she got into a car accident that would forever change the trajectory of her life. Following the crash, Laura was prescribed oxycodone, which she quickly became addicted to. Laura's life slowly spun out of control, and at some point in 2008, Sean was arrested for dragging her across the floor by her hair and throwing her onto the pavement. Shortly after this incident, Laura's family sent her to a treatment facility in Kentucky, where she made a significant recovery, eventually returning to Florida in early 2009. As Laura had been living with Sean for the last few years, she found herself homeless after their relationship ended. But this didn't deter Laura, and she moved between friends' homes and women's shelters. Laura had a few issues to straighten out in Florida before she could return home, and that's precisely what she planned to do. February 15th of 2009 would mark the last day anyone in Laura's family had contact with her. That evening, she spoke to her cousin via phone, telling them a date had failed to show up at the women's shelter that she was staying at. On February 16th, 2009, Laura left the shelter without warning, taking her stuff and walking out the front door. On February 17th of 2009, a St. Petersburg police officer found Laura sleeping behind a building close to Memorial Park Cemetery in St. Petersburg. He told her to move on and offered little assistance aside from pointing out women's shelters in the area. This police officer is believed to have been the last person to have seen Laura alive as she walked away from the cemetery. According to reports, between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., she spoke to an ex-boyfriend on the phone, although the nature of their call has never been disclosed. After February 15th, Laura's family desperately tried calling her but received no answer. Days later, they tried to report her missing, but authorities were uninterested in Laura's case. It wasn't until March 31st, 2009, that Laura Nimbach was classified as a missing person. Over a month had passed, and valuable clues and witnesses had potentially escaped the grasp of investigators. The community was informed of Laura's disappearance, but memories faded as the month passed. When investigators finally began to take Laura's case seriously, there was one suspect they had in mind: Sean Wheeler. After the assault on Laura in 2008, Sean had been arrested and the case had been pending in court. By February of 2009, the case was close to going to trial, and Laura was due to testify against her ex-boyfriend. Her family highlighted the suspicious timing of Laura's disappearance and didn't believe it was a coincidence. Laura was also due in court on unrelated charges at the time of her disappearance. Despite suspicions, no concrete evidence linking Sean Wheeler or anyone else to Laura's disappearance has been unearthed. Amanda Bott, who lived with Laura in Florida, started a campaign to find her friend using MySpace, Facebook, and tools within the community. Amanda and Laura's family have spent countless man-hours placing flyers, posters, and leaflets in businesses around St. Petersburg, hoping it may trigger someone's memory. If still alive today, Laura Marie Nimbach would be 36 years old. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Christopher Lyons of the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office at 727-582-6200, quoting case number SO09-71009. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.